think about food first.
Food is important.
Okay, perfect, perfect.
Hi, Sue. I'm well. How are you?
It's hugely important.
All right,
And that email that you sent out with all the information was very thorough. Good job. All right, cool.
put that there. All right, Julia says not to start late, and I think she's right. I always do start on time. Yeah, you take
Yeah,
your time,
keep-
Sue. It's 5:57, we have 3 minutes.
Yeah.
No, thank you. I have
Well,
water.
unless you're spiking it.
I was
With
like so
vitamins.
tired in the middle of the day today, and I was on a call with one of my colleagues, and I'm like, oh, I have a can of Coke in the fridge.
Yep, that's what I'm.
And
that's my
he's
little
like,
thing.
Coke, you have a budget hearing tonight. You don't want Coke. I'm like, yeah, that's a good point. But I only have to drink water. Gotta wait for Sue. You'll give me the 1 minute? We gotta wait for Sue.
What I bet it is. I bet it's the new growth habitat.
Good evening, everyone. It being 6 p.m. on Monday, May 6, 2024, we will begin our first of many of our FY 2025 budget hearings for the Committee of Ways and Means. And thank you for being here with us this evening. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing for a moment of silence for all those who serve in our military at home and abroad and for their families. Thank you. Clerk Semino, can we have the roll call, please?
Counselor Baraka,
Here.
Counselor Moran,
Here.
Counselor Flaherty,
Here.
Counselor Maglio is currently not here. Counselor Reynolds is currently not here.
Thank you, Clerk Semino. And I want to recognize we have Mayor Joyce with us this evening. Welcome, Mayor, Director of Finance, Mike Esmond, and our Town Auditor, Sean McGoldrick. Thank you all for being here, and I know we have others joining us who will be recognized in due time. And again, thank you, everyone, for being here. We have many nights of budget hearings in front of us, so please tune in, and if you want, you can rewatch all of these. Thank you to the BCAM team. There will not be public comment taking during these hearings with the Ways and Means committee meetings. However, public hearing on the town budget will be allowed on Wednesday, May 29th, at the end of this month, during our annual town meeting. If you have questions or comments that you would like to have answered, please email them to towncouncil at braintreema.gov. And that's, again, it's towncouncil@braintreema.gov. Right, we have no approval of minutes this evening, and we have no old business this evening. So we're going to start off with our new business, which is the FY 2025 operating budget. It's order number 24020 from Mayor Joyce, or take up any action relative thereto. This evening, we will be reviewing our revenue forecast. We will also be going over the town clerk's budget, the library budget, and the human resources budget. Just by way of procedure, any department heads who may or may not have answers during the questioning, we will ask for information requests, and we can get them back from you in writing, or have the night set aside for callbacks at the end of May before the town meeting. So questions may not get answered at first round. We have opportunities for them to be answered again. All right, so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mayor Joyce and Director Esmond. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. The presentation I'm about to walk through, we will make sure we post with the other online materials too. It is just a way of introduction. A lot of the material is also included in the mayor's executive summary to the budget. So I'll try to move through material relatively quickly to try to stay in my allotted time. But please let me know if there's anything I can answer as I'm going. So the baseline revenue forecast that we've noted in the budget for fiscal 25 is 2.74, but as we noted and highlighted here, after adjusting for the free cash reserves that were used to build the 24 budget, essentially growth for the baseline projection is 0%. And it's a starting point when we talked about we built the budget that we can't put enough emphasis to. That revenue forecast is the reality of where we feel that fiscal 25's revenues are going to be as a steady state before any other revenue initiatives are brought to bear for the fiscal 25 budget. I'll get into each of the components momentarily, but thematically, as we've noted, the growth in the levy was as shown here, the 3.1 million. That's more or less very consistent with what you'd expect in a year-over-year operating revenue forecast. Local aid came in at roughly about 1.5 currently. That process, local aid will continue to work through the state legislative process to write the 25 budget, so it'll be subject ultimately to the finalization of the GAA at the state level. And local receipts, we're projecting a forecast, we're forecasting growth of about 4% year over year. Just from a visual standpoint, you can see how much the town levy really represents as a portion of the total revenue the town takes in to support its operations in any given year. For fiscal 25, the baseline is about 71% of our revenue. That's up from 69% in 24's adopted budget, which is really explained by the fact that there was a disproportionately large percentage of one-time resource used to support the 24 budget. But 71% is obviously a very important key data point when we think about building our budget from year to year, because that is such a big part of what we use to support our operations. And as this committee knows, as we've noted before, the other components of it, while meaningful and significant in supporting our operations, are combined roughly about 30% of our total operational support. We're no different from any other town. The levy makes up a very large part of what we do and how we fund our operations. Just quickly on the projection for the town levy for next year for the revenues for baseline, the net essentially is about 114 million, 113.8. You can see the components here as we filed in the mayor's budget. The 3 million year-over-year increase, or the 2.75% percentage increase, accounts for is made up of the major components here. One thing to note The new growth estimate that we're projecting right now that builds into this, just under 600,000, is the actual that was filed in the tax recap with DOR last year. It's important to note and put emphasis on this. This approach is conservative. We certainly hope that we will see this number begin to increase very quickly. And there are notable reasons to be positive. Certainly the action the town council took last week was a good example of where we should be able to see new growth revenues hopefully rebounding from the levels we're at right now. This 595 represents about a 35% reduction from where we were about 5 years ago. So it is a low number, we recognize that, but we built this being cautious, recognizing that the trend has been for these numbers year over year to be in decline, and we did not want to build a number that was too ambitious or too high without having the ability to know what those amounts would be. There are a couple things also to note for the Ways and Means members here. We are going to be working to update our process to track new growth, new development from the cycle, all from permitting all the way through to CO, and being able to track that with more accuracy and regularity. That had been done in the past. I think we're looking to restart that with, particularly as efforts are underway to start to set this as a benchmark this to a higher number going forward. But where the basis of this for starting fiscal 25 was to use last year's number without it having a better reason or more precise number to put in its place. But as I said, our hope and our expectation is that number will grow and recover in the years ahead. On local aid, just turning to the major components here, you can see illustrated. Chapter 70, right now we're assuming an increase of about 2.6% year over year. The House's number assumed $104 per student minimum aid, which was a helpful increase. Overall, total state aid roughly grows by 1.5% after accounting for the assessments that are applied to the state aid. So it's just a good, helpful illustration when you think of the base of 23 million. 1.5% really essentially is about 300,000 in growth. Welcome, and we're moving in a positive direction, but not keeping up with the overall pressures on the expense budget we see, not just in education, but across town government generally. But these were the assumptions, and as I noted, as the GAA budget writing process at the state level works through, we will review and provide updates to Ways and Means and Town Council should there be any changes that we need to file. Moving quickly, but wanted to give emphasis on the local receipts forecast. So this forecast we're projecting for fiscal 25 is about 4% growth. We noted in the mayor's budget discussions the guidance that we get from the Division of Local Services is that we should be using conservative estimates unless justified and approved by the Department of Revenue's commissioner. So a 4% annual change is a notable number from, if you look where we were for the fiscal 24 adopted budget. There's a few areas where we are projecting or emphasizing greater growth than 2%, for example. I'll just highlight a couple of those, specifically the local meals and hotel local option piece. We're projecting growth there still somewhat above a 2% standard baseline. Yeah, as well, the investment income projection here, we're maintaining the 2023 actual number of 2.4, and otherwise we're generally projecting baseline growth of about 2%. Those numbers are generally in line as a point of comparison with the fiscal 23 actual, except in those cases as noted where there would be one-time increases that increase the fiscal 23 actual substantially greater than what was than what would be sort of the baseline expectation. So in those cases, probably most notable would be your building rental amount where we received a one-time rental amount, a rental payment of $1 million, or your building or your license and permitting, which in fiscal 23, because of some very outliers, we were trending substantially above what would be the long-term average projection of that, or what would be the average projection in the previous 5 years, I should say. So in putting this together, these numbers are, 4% is probably is a good number. I think it's an achievable number, but it's certainly one that sort of would stand out notably above where we would think the typical growth rate would be somewhere in the range of 2%. These are a large and diverse group of fees, right? So some of them are dependent on the economic cycle. Many of them are not. They're basically just tied to activities we're doing or just regular annual activities of town members or businesses, et cetera. So they're not all predictable in the same way that you would sort of through the economic cycle. And for that reason, I think that's why the state's guidance has historically always been to be careful and cautious with those. Moving to the next, to new revenue, just some key highlights, or key notable highlights that we mentioned quickly in last week's announcement. We have roughly about $1.8 million in new revenue initiatives that are identified and relied upon in the mayor's budget. Those essentially can be broken into two groups. The first would be those tools that have been filed in the Governor's Municipal Empowerment Act, which we have projected a total of $921,000 in fiscal '25 revenues, assuming an effective date of October 1st. The motion in the mayor's budget that's filed would file the 921 as certified free cash that would be made available to support fiscal '25. But should the legislature and town council decide to act for these, which we're advocating for, that would be repealed, and these revenues would essentially replace dollar for dollar the assumed use of free cash in '25 associated with that. That is essentially the approach that we, in consulting with DLS, believed is the most prudent and cautious in lieu of the fact that it is not yet state law, and we will watch closely as these three options, amongst everything, all the other provisions in the Municipal Empowerment Act, move through the state legislative process. And we're hopeful that as the communities are writing their budgets, there will be support such as this to grow in support of these revenue options available to towns such as Braintree. The other major revenue new initiatives that are identified in the mayor's budget are the $520,000 we've identified for trash collection fee. So right now, the proposal that we are working to implement and promulgate will be to increase the trash fee, the residential trash fee, by $50 each year for the next 3 successive years. So this represents, for most residents, an increase from $150 to $200. The cost of the service is substantially, as I think it's been documented for several years, substantially greater than the revenue we bring in. And this is an important implementation to try to bring us back into that. But we structured this in a way so that it wasn't all at one time. And by the end of the third year, hopefully those expenses are more or less in line with where our revenue is, and we'll be tracking that closely. We have been working across a bunch of different departments here and to make sure that we can implement this successfully and in a way that is most affordable and manageable given the change for residents. There's a number of components to that, particularly with respect to trying to put it on a quarterly billing process. But there's a lot of detail that literally our departments are still working through to make sure that quarterly billing process through the water and sewer bill, but we're working through the detail to make sure that that can be communicated and implemented effectively. And it's not without zero consideration or complication. So the teams are working diligently here to make sure that we are able to put that in place for fiscal '25. The other major revenue initiative that's identified here is roughly $4.1 million of our fees, of the total of local revenues that are generated at the local level for the town, have been identified for review of the current fee with a projection of roughly a 5 to 6% increase. That we working to identify what those are so we can articulate those and promulgate those by the end of this fiscal year for July 1st. And that list is not fully complete yet, but we will provide that to the council and the committee as soon as possible. The hope and expectation is that coinciding with this, the revenue that would be generated from those fees, we will also be promulgating a new fee rate setting policy to adhere to the state guidelines in mass municipal law, the restrictions that we have, particularly that fees are supposed to be set at reasonable levels and not for essentially revenue generating purposes, but really to cover the cost of service. But that they can also be set at a regular, predictable time frame, ideally at least every 3 years, at modest amounts to keep up with the cost of the service, usually in line with inflation and nothing more. So that is an intention we articulated in the mayor's budget discussion so that we could make sure that that policy is also clear and articulated as an expectation with our departments and in the residents as we move forward. So that, again, there can be predictable increases that are modest and cover the cost of service in those cases. All right, last slide, I promise. So just to emphasize for those new revenue initiatives the importance, and we talked a lot, the mayor talked a lot in last week's presentation about making sure we have a multi-year look at what the generation of our revenue and expenses will mean. All told, those revenue options that I just walked through represent about $10.5 million over a 4-year period. So they're an important portion of the revenue of the gap closing solve over the 4-year period for the town. Certainly not the largest solve, but a meaningful one, and one that we would note is important for us to move forward with as they are recurring revenues that the town can rely on as we're trying to bring a balanced solution, relying on both revenue options as well as expense controls to balance 25 and in the 3 fiscal years following. And I will conclude there and see what questions I can answer for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Director Esmond. And just before we move to questions, I want to recognize Councilor Maglio and Councilor Reynolds. So thank you. And also we have District 4 Councilor Ann Quilty in our audience this evening. So with that, Mayor Joyce, did you want to make any remarks before we move to questions? And Mr. McGoldrick? Okay. In that case, I will open it up, and this again for the revenue forecast overview, if there's any questions for Director Esmond this time. Councilor Moran.
Thank you. Director Esmond, I just want to first of all compliment you on the documenting of the proposed budget that you've provided us has been outstanding. The amount of information that we had and having the variety of it. I want to compliment you and your team and the mayor's office on their effort to fully inform the Ways and Means, the council, and the people, the residents of Braintree through your presentation or your preparation of this budget book and these slides tonight. I have 3 questions. One, the chart that you showed previously on local receipts shows the trash fee for FY25 at $1,500,000. Whereas what we're talking about, I thought in this proposed budget is an increase in the fee.
Correct.
So wouldn't that show in that column?
Sorry, I should have noted, you're correct, Counselor. So this is the baseline projection.
Yeah.
So this forecast right here, the 21.7 in the components, does not reflect the additional revenues. I can update this table to show additional column that shows with the revenue changes here. So correct.
Okay, I just wanted to understand that. Secondly, on your investment income, you're, you're showing a projected increase back to about a 2023 level of 2.4 million in investment income. Are you confident in that, given the fluctuations in the markets that we've seen?
I recognize that there is absolutely going to be potentially some risk in the rate environment that we're looking at. For '24, projecting out where we are, we should be landing in fiscal '24 around that amount. The rate environment is certainly an open question. Would emphasize that we're not looking at a scenario where we're going back down to. I can't envision a scenario where we're going back down to a rate environment we saw, let's say at the peak of COVID, or maybe even in the fallout out of the previous Great Recession. Absolutely, it will be if we see a rate environment where rates are, dropping substantially, and therefore the investment returns on the, let's say, the fixed income side are therefore challenged, it's going to be a question on that side. I think it's fair to expect that we would see, hopefully, the markets more broadly on the equity side generating a better return or a more reliable one. But it's a good question, Counselor. It's one that we talked about. Sean and I actually spent a little time talking about it again today. Right at this moment, I think there's a high degree of confidence for fiscal '25, but the out years will be something we'll have to look at regularly, and I think we will also have to watch this closely. I feel that there would be, the risk we're talking about would not be complete. It might be something that, obviously proportionate to what the rate environment we would see, but I think certainly the tone and expectation of the rate reductions right now has certainly been tempered somewhat by the reality.
I'm not really overly concerned with you having to prognosticate on the market. I think it's difficult for experts to do that, and I consider your expertise in municipal and governmental finance. I think there's enough flexibility, and you've been pretty prudent in forecasting local receipts. And so if you're wrong on one or two columns, I think you'll make it up in other areas. I'm not overly worried about that. But I am going to ask a couple of questions that relate to why we haven't pursued opportunities for additional local receipts. One is on the pilot. I think it's important for us to revisit the payment in lieu of taxes that Braintree Electric Light provides, and to approach them urgently to see if they can increase the payment that they make to the town. I know that it has to be based on the actual value of property and what their actual bill would pay. That being said, I think that since this payment in lieu of taxes was last visited, I think there's been an appreciation in the value of the property that would support an additional payment by Braintree Electric. I think they're in a position to make an additional contribution, and I would urge you to fully explore that option. Secondly, I think that we need to look at the possibility to get additional revenue from the transfer station, formerly known as Covanta, now rebranded as ReWorld. And we should revisit whether or not we want to negotiate that lease so that it provides us with new revenue. I know that there's a sentiment in favor of exploring or going after development on that parcel, on the former landfill and the transfer station, and I don't want to go far afield, but I think that is another source of revenue that we need to explore at this time. I'm not saying by any means that these two will put us in a position where we won't need the override. We will still need the override. But I do think that we can be more aggressive in pursuing local receipts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Moran. Councilor Reynolds?
Chairman. And my apologies to you folks for my lateness and tardiness getting here this evening. I hope it's a sign of the economy improving that the traffic is getting worse coming in and out of Boston. So, okay, so excellent questions by the previous speaker. Those questions spoke to the larger opportunities perhaps for increasing revenues. My question was, have you also looked at some of the smaller and hopefully more cumulative benefits of things along the lines of plumbing fees and licensing, building fees, anything of that nature? Has that been discussed?
So, Counselor, I'm not sure when you came in, but one of the initiatives we have, which has a modest revenue target tied to it, about $246,000, is that yes. The short answer is yes. We're projecting about a 5 or 6% increase across the. There's about 4.1 million in revenues that we feel like are part of a group of categories that should be reviewed. And so there is a definite yes to your answer. I think we'll be working to get those in shape to be ready for July 1st. So we will share that list with folks, with the committee ahead of before the end of this month, with the intention to be able to promulgate those and have them in place. What I emphasized, and I'm sorry if you came in for this part, was our approach is going to need to be balanced because we are bound by MGL essentially requires that we be reasonable and not have as far as the rates being set at affordable rates to cover the cost of the service. So in some cases we would only be bound really to a cap of, let's say, by the rate of inflation. But we should still have a process where we regularly, predictably increase all rates wherever we can by at least that amount to stay up with the cost of the service. And that is why we will be looking to implement a new rate-setting policy that essentially, every 3 years would have us at least reviewing and ideally adjusting at those modest levels for that so that we keep up with the cost again of the service.
And again, thank you for your patience, and my apologies for having to rehash some of the information you've already shared with the committee this evening prior to my arrival. I think that's a very prudent approach. Obviously, we want to be fair to consumers. We want to be fair. We want to be balanced in our approaches of really not leaving a stone unturned, if you will. And with that, and again, my apologies if this has been covered or a question had been asked previous to my arrival this evening. Have there been opportunities to identify any additional revenues from rentals or properties under ownership of the town, but currently underutilized or not utilized?
Right. I think somewhat related to Councilor Moran's point, I think these are all related. I think we are looking to bring the full portfolio of properties that are subject to the pilot or a lease or potentially other opportunities into a lens where we're able to see how are we doing and having a comparable, consistent treatment of those. There are cases where we may be getting rent without any escalation for several years. There are cases where we might not be getting market rate, which may be the right choice given the purpose, but it's not necessarily clear whether we should be revisiting that purpose or revisiting that after many years. There's also cases where we just need to make sure we get all the the paperwork lined up so we can start to have effective communications. I think this is both the questions are really pointing to a really important part of what Braintree needs to do best, or better and best, which is manage our portfolio as best we can, almost like a real estate management company would be. So I think while in this budget we don't have any actionable components, with the exception of us looking at the inadequate school, there are absolutely that is absolutely on our agenda for us to be able to start making progress towards and be able to implement essentially a uniform approach to all of our portfolio to make sure we're getting the most for it, or if there's not, then we have a clearly articulated reason if we've made an exception or if there is a differential from what we can do. We have a lot of assets. I think, it's hard to even say that I have enumerated them in the full degree yet. So I think there's a lot for us to do there, and I take the point very, very, very seriously.
Tremendous, great, thank you, I appreciate that. And I have the faith in this administration to perform the due diligence in that manner. I think that there is opportunity. However, it's not going to be a boom, if you will, of revenue opportunities, but cutting costs, covering existing costs in particular buildings perhaps, by getting a little bit creative perhaps with leasing, rentals, et cetera. So thank you very much. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Councilor Reynolds. Councilor Maglio?
Yes, I have a question that may be an add-on to that, and it may also be too much in the weeds, so feel free to just table it. But would that also include things like our blight ordinance and looking at when it is appropriate for a blighted property and we send a letter of notice regarding the condition, and then we implement fees and actually charge fees and actually collect those fees?
Right. I would probably say broadly, and I defer to the experts on sort of the actual substance of the blighted property process. I think we need to look at places where we have options that other communities are employing that we could or should be employing more. That would be potentially one. I mean, also who we charge and when we charge interest and penalties for certain specific things and in what way. Obviously, we're trying not to pile on, but I think we're recognizing that a number of things we need to really look to our peers and look to the ways that we can implement best practice. So not to be evasive to the more detailed question, Counselor, but I think that's probably the right way I'd answer that tonight, is to say, it's all things should be on the table, and I think this is a multi-year process to do things as accountable and in as detailed and as thorough fashion as possible.
Excellent, thank you. And then a second question is related to the difference in FY23 versus FY24 in the licensing and permitting, the 4 million down to 2 million. Just curious about that story.
Sure. So essentially, and I'll make a note to do the 5-year look back for the efficiency of this sheet. I didn't put a column there, but the 4.1 is really an outlier. The permit fees specifically, I think, was for the Tri-Town plant. Okay. So it brought the biggest group of that, but it brought that one-time actual substantially higher. And you can see for the fiscal 24, our current year budget, it was also brought back down. We're looking at something in the 2 to 2.2%, 2.2 to 2.2 million, range as sort of baseline. And that's really what explains the forecast here. It's really just making sure we're not accounting for one-off outliers. There's always some one-offs, but there's obviously a few notables here.
Excellent.
In that case.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Maglio. Councilor Flaherty?
Thank you. My questions are surrounding the new growth figure that we see. I mean, it is $595,435. I think that is a realistic number, and I'm glad to see that, while it's low, I don't think it's a number we're in danger of not making. However, in the past, Braintree has had higher numbers set for new growth and has met those numbers. So what I'm curious about is whether this administration has targeted goals for where we could realistically put a new growth number in the following fiscal year.
I mean, I think the short answer would be we absolutely need to do that, Counselor. We're not yet. I'm not yet. I think this was a cautious approach, but I think we need to be able to put together, and we're working with the building team to put together more updated data so that we can track the life of these, so we have a more predictive sense. I mean, some things are subject to change, but between knowing when the permitting and the CO dates are supposed to be, and working with assessing to come up with realistic, maybe conservative valuations, we should have better numbers, I think, in the year to come for the next year. And there are a number of projects and notable efforts underway with COs and that have already been permitted with COs in the next fiscal year that will help give us clarity to what those numbers are going to be. And I think, we're really going to be able to build, hopefully, a better model that's more predictive in that. We're also, there's a couple other things that I'll just quickly note. So this fiscal year, at the conclusion of this fiscal year, we've just executed new agreements for the property, real property and personal property assessments, valuation, for two different contracted firms rather than having them be bundled under one. The intent with that approach by my predecessor was to actually have a little more nuance, but hopefully a stronger result that should affect ultimately the calculation for new growth in the years coming. Particularly, I think, in personal property too, where sometimes that can be missed. So we're hopeful also from the results of that, in those engagements that, and you will see when we get to the finance department sections, when we're talking about the investments, you will see the new spending associated with those agreements, but we're hopeful that those will actually pay off substantially with better valuation figures and more up-to-date data. So I hope, Councillor, that I feel very confident saying that this year, yes, it's conservative, but going forward, we should have stronger predictive and analytical components to be able to put this projection forward. For the fiscal 26 and beyond, and hopefully showing a ramp up in growth for that.
Thank you. So that's very interesting. And in any other year, when I have asked about the underpinnings or the basis for the new growth number, it has always been explained to me that it was simply a 10-year average of actual new growth. And so you're discussing a model for predicting a figure that is somewhat more sophisticated than that, I think.
Right.
Can you describe the kinds of factors that would go into such a model?
Sure. I mean, probably the biggest is time frame, and also the associated valuation. I mean, the properties will change their valuations, but they're not going to start from zero either. So you need to be mindful of, when over the course of the valuation process for the June 30 date, going back to January 1st, what's the value in this year's assessment and what the potentially would be for when we do the tax recap. So the goal would be able to put together something that would look at particularly large projects, let's call them the needle movers, and those would be the area where we would be looking to say, what's the stage of the project, when could we expect that they would be recognized as, their valuation increase would be recognized and therefore subject to, bringing us higher taxation. So I think that's the goal, is that we would have that. The problem with using the average is, while it could be a predictive, averages are only typically, when you take it in that approach, looking at the history, right? And so we've been on a downward trend. I think I noted a 5-year number. The 595 represents about a 35% drop where we were 5 years ago. So the problem is the averages are probably misleadingly unpredictive and to the detriment, unfavorably, I should say, to where we're going. So we've all seen that chart. The data is all there at DLS. We've been trending down, and so a 5-year average is probably a high number in any year we take it, 5 or 10 year. So we need to look at something that's more detailed and more granular as a way to do it. And I think there are other peers that we can learn from. I mean, that's a big part of it, is looking at what's the best practice with other communities to make sure that we're doing this as best we can.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's all. No, that's it.
All right, thank you, and I will echo Councillor Moran's sentiments. This is extremely helpful. It's in plain language. I urge residents to take a look at least at the executive summary. Very easy to understand, and thank you to Mayor Joyce and Director Esmond for putting that together for us. I have a couple of questions as well. So just for my own edification here, in your, you've got the initial FY '25 budget and the no override '25, and the difference in that is the $500,000 for trash and the $400,000 in other fees-ish?
The initial forecast as well as where we are with new revenue initiatives, for example, is this what you mean?
So on page 12 in the budget book, the table reads, am I reading this right? Yeah, okay. Initial FY 2025 is 160, 425, 612 for total revenue. The no override is 162, 250, 837. Do you see that where I'm looking on the table?
Yep.
It looks like the difference is all in the local receipts.
Correct. That's
And
correct.
that accounts for the $500,000 increase in trash.
That's correct, Counselor.
Overall.
Correct.
And 384 in the other fees/sources.
Essentially, let me just, if you could, the difference between those two numbers and what's projected in the initial and no override is that 1.825 million, sorry, that's shown here. So you're right, it's all in the local receipts category, and it's made up by those components right here. That's reflected in the 1.825. So the answer is yes, the trash fee is part of that. We are also showing for that line the other local option pieces from the Municipal Empowerment Act, as well as the fee rental adjustments I mentioned before.
But the Municipal Empowerment Act is wrapped up in other financing?
So, thank you. So for the purposes of the discussion, we've shown it as a recurring revenue in the local options, but in the motions, we've had to file it as an other financing source.
So is it double counted? I'm sorry, I'm confused.
It's not double counted. Thank you. I should have actually noted that to start. It's not double counted in the sense that in our narrative, we wanted to describe it as a recurring source and how we proposed it. Because we were advised we should not file for it as a recurring source of revenue since you essentially need several acts to be done. When you read in the program summary for revenue and program spending, it is reflected as a other financing source and footnoted. So it's not double counted, but the local revenues are adjusted to be 921,000 less than the number.
Okay. Bear with me 1 second.
So if you were to look at page 1 of Exhibit A1, which is the schedule of fiscal
Yep.
25. The local receipt number there,
It's 22.
22619. For discussion purposes, on the schedule you noted before, we have it shown in the no override schedule as 23540.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I apologize, we did footnote it in some places, but I think we probably, I should have given emphasis to start.
Okay, no, I just wanted to make sure I was reading it right. Thank you for the explanation. So on the Municipal Empowerment Act, my understanding is that is still in committee, at least until June 14th.
Correct.
And I believe the session ends on July 1st for the state legislature.
July 31st. but
July
you're
31st.
You're
Okay,
right,
thank you for
July.
correcting me.
It's July.
So do we have any sense from our state delegation if that's going to move through this session?
no one's predicting yes or no. I think it's hard to say. I mean, I think what's been sort of, I think the MMA and at the local community level, I think there is a lot of advocacy for any revenue tools, particularly these, where a couple of them are already established and they're really essentially tweaking them. There is discussion and it's not uniformly accepted or supported, I should say. So it's hard to know. I think one of the things we wanted to do is by virtue of us including it in the budget, it's a way for Braintree to say that this is something that's important and we recognize these tools as helpful and very important in this environment where we're looking at, restrained revenue growth year over year that we constantly need to be able to account for, that we would welcome and implement these new tools. But it's hard to say, to your question, Councilor, it's hard to say for sure if it will be done, implemented. The 921,000 is not an insignificant number. Hopefully it's manageable. We'd expect it would be. If we have a sense by July 31st that it's not going to be, we would look to take measures to account for that rather than just, this would allow us to use free cash, but we would try to limit the impact to our free cash to lessen the blow of using 921,000.
And you're only accounting for that for 3/4 of the year?
Correct.
Anyway, so I don't know, Mayor Joyce, if you've had any contact with our state delegation on either advocating for this, certainly the councilors or committee members will reach out. I've already reached out to one of our senators, but do you have any sense?
Sure. I would say the sense is very similar to what Director Esmond said. I think people are, not committed to either side. I do think that Lieutenant Governor Driscoll, given her unique perspective of having been the mayor of Salem, is very much advocating for this. And I've been to several meetings of other mayors, and we're all sort of advocating for more local options. I think as we've seen at the state level, it does seem like less resources are available and trickling down into our communities. So these types of options give communities a little bit more power to make some decisions about reoccurring revenue sources. So I think it's hard to predict, but I do think there is a lot of support from other municipalities. But I don't have a good sense one way or the other. I think the way we approached it was conservative and hopeful that it would be an option. I think as we went into considering an override and putting forward an override to residents, we really wanted to make sure that we weighed the potential for other sources. And, I will say, this budget is different in such that we don't have one-time revenue sources in it. And we also have been noting to all of our department heads that we do want to limit supplemental budgeting for emergency situations. So with this budget, we're also looking at removing supplemental requests the best that we can. So I think we're baking in a lot of conservative estimates here, but we're trying to do this very tightly, and being conservative at the same time. So I don't have a good sense for if it'll go, other than to say there's a lot of support for it, but we'll see what happens.
Okay, thank you for that. And I do appreciate the thoroughness, and the new growth number, to Councilor Flaherty's point, hopefully is lower than we would expect, but I appreciate that you have budgeted it that way, and maybe there'll be some offsets if this doesn't pass, if the Municipal Empowerment Act doesn't pass. One other follow-up question on that, Director Esmond. How does maybe this is, anybody's seen my car, they know it's old. So how does the excise vehicle surcharge work? Is that, if there was, it would be an additional 5%?
On the actual charge itself.
Okay, so that would, again, if the Municipal Empowerment Act passes, because the excise tax is one of the bigger components of our local receipts.
Right. So that is the local meals and hotel options are existing in place. Most communities have adopted them. The surcharge would be new.
Okay.
Sorry, I should clarify. That would be new in the sense of that there is no surcharge currently. I think the intent was to allow a modest amount of revenue capture for communities that chose to adopt it. And that's 5%, I think, is in the, is what the governor's bill would call for.
It's 5% on the sale price of your vehicle?
Of the surcharge.
Of the surcharge?
Yeah,
Okay.
yes, sorry to be clear.
Okay. And then my last question are, and I apologize if I missed this during the conversation, do we have an estimate? So you've got $384,000 in other fees,
Right.
but you don't yet know what those other fees are?
We know the window, but we don't know what they're going to be set at yet. I think it's something we're working to, we want to work to implement over the next, to be ready for July 1st, but we should be able to provide them, in the ensuing weeks. They're just not to be final. No, we don't know them specifically yet. What would be increased just yet?
So how did you come up with the figure?
So the numbers of the categories that I identified were just under $4.2 million. So also meeting with departments and looking at fees that had not been changed for, several years, but also knowing that was sort of the universe, the 4.183. So it's a target of 5 to 6% of that base fiscal 24 amount of 4.18. So I think the goal is to be modest and not have a big increase, which again, we're not really, we're bound not to have a big increase as a revenue solve. This is really about keeping up with the cost of service. And it should be part of a regular process as part of your budget writing process, not as a solve, but as a way to keep up with that cost.
Okay.
So that's the target. We've had discussions across several departments so far, but probably it would be wise for me to just say that we're still working on it before we articulate exactly what those would be, to make sure that we have a good, clear list precisely.
Okay. Yeah, that would be great when that is available before July 1st, if that can come to the council with the details. Thank you. That would be super helpful. Last question I have, the trash fee. You said applies to most residents. So am I to imagine or assume that the senior discount is still in place? And is it a step change for seniors, or what's the mechanism for that?
Right now, we're assuming the same senior discount. I know Christina's here, from our treasurer's here. I think it's 55, and we're assuming that it stays in place. That's actually one of the issues that she and a wide team is working to make sure, because 55 would be more than your first quarterly bill. So when do you apply the senior discount? Would it be at the first quarter, or would it be quarterly, so 55 divided by 4? But right now, we're assuming that remains in place. It wasn't a percentage for the 55. We didn't apply it as a percentage. We just kept the dollar amount for the projection for 200. So it's not reduced or increased.
Okay, so the fee for the trash for seniors, if they're using that program, there's no change?
Essentially, no change. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions on revenue at this time? And just for committee members and the general public, all of these items will remain open, so they can be revisited throughout the course of the hearing. So if other questions arise, we can absolutely bring it back. All right. Seeing none. Thank you very much, Director Esmond, and again, Mayor Joyce, for being with us this evening. At this time, we will move on to Clerk Casey. Thank you for being with us tonight, Mr. Casey.
Well, it's a pleasure. It's my 17th budget hearing, and this is the 17th year of the new government. Madam Chairman?
Yes, if you have
May
a
I?
statement you'd like to make, go right
Okay.
ahead.
The town clerk's office is considered the core of the local government and serves as the central information center for local residents and citizens at large. The office operates in accordance with the provisions of more than 75 chapters in over 500 sections of Massachusetts general laws. Under the umbrella of services managed by the clerk's office, it includes, but not limited to, elections, public record access, vital records, recording of the planning board and zoning board decisions, federal and local census, annual dog registration, open meeting law, conflict of interest law, and ethic requirements, maintaining the preservation of town records, codification of new ordinances, and provides administrative support for the Board of License Commissioners, where I serve as the chairperson per the town charter. It is staffed by 4 full-time positions, 3 of which are covered under collective bargaining agreements, and it is supplemented with over 75 election workers and a board of registrars appointed by the mayor. The annual budget request for the department is heavily driven by election cycles and other responsibilities mandated by Mass General Law. It should be noted the department generates approximately $300,000 in annual revenue from fees assessed on the various licenses and certified records. For fiscal 2025, the budget proposal is $561,573. It reflects over a 13% or an $88,000 reduction from fiscal year '24. That is primarily driven by a reduction in one election versus fiscal 2024, and is offset by increases in contractual obligations. The clerk budget provides for the following: salary for 4 full-time positions, including contractual stipends, allocation for a September state primary and November state general elections, funding to provide for the annual town census, technology allocations to support various applications such as FOIA, vital records, dog, marriage, and other business applications. And then in addition, there are some allocations for city town clerk conferences, their membership fees, as well as a cell phone and printing and office supplies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clerk Casey. And I know your staff is not with you tonight, but I'd like to just recognize them as well, since they are the day in and day out face of Town Hall for many, many residents and non-residents too. So
Yes.
thank
you.
you for all, you and them for all of the efforts. All right, with that, I will open it up to my committee members for comments or questions to Clerk Casey. Counselor Flaherty.
Thank you. Welcome, Jim, Casey.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming today. So when we were listening to Director Esmond talk about fees, he was talking about increasing fees 5 to 6% to cover, to make modest, predictable increases over time to help us predict our revenue better going forward and ensure that it keeps pace with the standards set by other communities and the needs of our own community. You also collect fees. Do you anticipate implementing a similar program in the near future?
Unfortunately, I did not receive the memo to review fees from my department, though we do generate quite a few fees. It's across a large, broad spectrum of areas, like my licensing. I have done research in the past. Our licensing fees are on the lower end of most communities, as well as for certified copies, dogs, and flammable storage licenses, our business certificates, marriage intentions, and other miscellaneous. We tend to be on the low end. We have not raised our fees, 2,000. So there could be some opportunity there. Off the top of my head, I could see an additional 50,000 in additional fee revenue by trying to match what the other communities around are charging.
I think if we have not raised our fees since 2000, that it is a good idea for us to look at what other communities are charging for similar services and ensure that we are keeping pace with the standards around us. I would advocate for that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. Councillor Maglio.
Very much. I would agree with that also in terms of looking at our fees. And then just a quick point of information. If there were violations against a particular dwelling, that would go through the clerk's department.
No,
in
it
terms of-
doesn't. That would go through the building department. The only thing, extra charge I would charge is if you didn't register your 3 little dogs and you were late on your registration, I have the authority to hit you with a fine. But that's about all.
Thank you for the
additional-
warning.
You got it.
But I thought that, so that any time that the municipal licenses department writes a violation of, say, an apartment building where there's maybe, I don't know, 6 moldy bathrooms on the same floor, and there are violations, those violations, any fines associated with those would not go through the clerk's office for collection.
I do not see those revenues.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that's it, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Reynolds.
Madam Chair, good evening, Clerk Casey.
Good evening.
Good to see you again.
Always good to be seen.
All right. I know the next line to that, but we
Okay.
won't share that. My question has to do with your actual budget for 25, fiscal year 25, in particular, the elections. I know that you have taken a 32.8% cut in that area. Could you describe a bit to us where those cuts are coming from?
Okay, when preparing for last year's budget, at the time, back in March of 2023, we had 3 elections on our radar: a preliminary mayoral race to be held in September, the November local elections, and then the March 2024 presidential primary election. At that time, preparing the budget, I did not have any insight whether the council would adopt all the early voting options that we have before us for elections, nor I knew that for the March election, that is mandated by the state. However, we had to come up with an estimate on the number. They mail out postcards to every voter. I do not have any statistics to show me what is the return rate of those postcards. In fact, I received 5 postcards today that were mailed out in January for a ballot for the September and November election to come forward. But right now, I have 3,800 voters. My anticipation back a year ago was I was going to have a lot higher amount, considering the atmosphere of the presidential primary and upcoming elections and the number of requests for ballots. Back
Okay.
in the first year we did it, I was getting 6,000, 7,000 requests for mail ballots, and it dropped to 3,800, which was a big surprise.
Okay, so if I followed along with the various responses that you gave there, so there will be a less frequency of official actions required in the election area in the fiscal year of 25.
There'll be one less election. However, we're talking about an election in November. Typically, a local election has about a 30% turnout. State general elections, about 45% turnout. I'm expecting an 80% turnout for the November election. I'm anticipating that when we have early voting in person here, it's run for a 2-week cycle. I'll have to staff up for that. I'm expecting over 7,000 people to visit here in Town Hall.
Okay, so
All elections aren't the same. It's
So
the time.
where is, just I guess, cut and dry, where are the reductions in costs? So you're not having as many costs, is that what, is that a yes or no? You don't have as many costs anticipated in '25 as you did in '24?
I do not. I'm looking at a reduction for the September election in postage costs.
Okay.
Okay, I'm looking for, I'm having one less election with all the associated costs with that. Last year, the September and November election, I was paying for the ballots. This year, the state's paying for the ballots.
Okay,
So
all
there's
right.
a significant cost associated with that, along with the programming.
Got
of
it.
my
So you're not, so with these costs, I mean, obviously, I asked the question due to the fact that the significance of the percentage of the cost my first reaction would be, what's being cut from this process? You have then adequately explained, not necessarily are there large cuts in your budget per se, but rather your costs won't be as significant this year
That's
as they
correct.
were last year.
And just thinking about for next year, it's going to be a little lower because I have one election. But the year after that, I'm going to be coming forward with probably a 40% increase in my budget because
Okay.
I'll have 3 elections again.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Counselor Moran?
Thank you. I'll be real quick because Clerk Casey, you just pretty much answered. I had a question about your election overtime line in your town clerk administration budget, but I think you pretty much answered that. With the volume of people that show up to vote on a federal election, you're going to need more overtime than you will in the other subsequent non-federal election years. So you pretty much answered that question for me. I would be remiss if I do not take the opportunity to compliment your staff and the variety of interactions that I've had with them for various needs and so forth. They've been unfailingly helpful and cooperative, and you do more than is necessary to remind me of my obligation to pay for my dog license, and I still forget to do it. So I'll be in tomorrow.
What you just said here, just as a little side comment, is that I'm very technology-focused. The purchase of that application for the dogs, I can email you 100 emails to get you to do that dog. If I had to do it without this application, that would cost me 68 cents each time I mailed out that thing. So there's a lot of cost savings and efficiencies built in. And right now, we're running ahead of last year's numbers on dog registrations in the first month.
All right. Well, I'll be a contributor soon.
Okay.
All set?
Yep, thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you, Counselor Moran. I have a couple questions, Clerk Casey. The first is, I know last year we spoke about this, the bylaw printing for $25,000. This was in FY24.
Okay, that is correct.
Did that is that complete?
Since all of
it's
the
not budgeted for-
codification is done, we're verifying what they have completed. I expect to get the bill shortly. In fact, I have a little comment here that I did budget $25,000 for that because we went several years without a budget, and it looks as though it'll be around $15,000. So there's a $10,000 saving. However, that money is going to be used to fund the special election.
That was going to be my next question, so thank you for that. And then this year, I have actually got a couple questions on the bylaw printing, believe it or not. Is $5,000 sufficient for FY25 then?
Yes, because traditionally, you only have a handful to do,
Okay,
okay? But like I said,
We
my
got
budget
behind.
was cut for 3 years in a row in that area to pay for the annual maintenance fee, and they all built up, and it was Katie by the door last December trying to straighten out that mess.
all right, thank you very much. And then I would just request, and I will make a formal request through the council president, but if you could please provide the Ways and Means Committee and/or through the council president with an evaluation of the fees in alignment with the other departments, that would be helpful.
Sure.
Thank you.
Most definitely.
In your recommendations. Right, anything else for the town clerk? Clerk Semino, do you mind taking that back? Thank you so much. All right, thank you very much.
Madam
Yes,
Chairperson,
please
if
go
I have
ahead.
one commercial break?
Yes,
I just want
PSA.
to hold this up for Bill to see it, that there is a special election. It's going to be held Saturday, June 15th. It'll be at the 3 voting centers, Braintree High School, East Middle School, and South Middle School, the new middle school. Okay? And anybody who's interested, who will not be around on June 15th, probably most definitely by May 20th, I'll have absentee ballots. You can just come in to Town Hall, you can fill out an application and cast an absentee ballot in person. You can go online or text town clerk at braintreema.gov, and we can email you out an application, and then you can send that back and have it mailed to your home. The only thing, you have until June 4th at noontime, if you want to cast a absentee ballot in person. That's the last date and time that you can do that. Otherwise, it's the election day, June 15th. All right?
Go ahead, Counselor Maglio.
4th is the last day to.
No, June 14th. Did I
Oh,
say
June
June 14th?
14th.
June 14th for absentee ballot.
Is the last day to get it in.
That's the last day to show up in person at noontime. The last day to mail it in is 5 days before the election. Okay, but I would highly recommend people do not wait till 5 days, because by the time we get it, mail it back to you, and then you return it back to us, it's going to show up after election night.
Okay, and then what is the last day to request an absentee ballot?
5 days before election day,
Okay,
the 10th.
at 10?
No, the 10th.
Oh, the 10th, okay, all right,
Okay, and all this information's on the town website.
okay.
Thank you kindly, and everybody have a great night.
Thank you, Clerk Casey.
I don't know where to write that.
Okay, next up, Director Stano, thank you for being with us. And I believe we have 2 library trustees here with us, Jeff Coons and Christian Vanderslice, and our Assistant Library Director as well. Yeah, thank you so much. Please join us. We're now going to be going over the library budget. If you have a short presentation, Director Stano, go right ahead. The floor is yours.
Great. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to present the library's FY25 budget. I am Terry Stano, the director of the Thayer Public Library. I am with Assistant Director Laurie Kavanaugh and 2 trustees, Christian Vanderslice and Jeff Coons. I want to express my gratitude for your support and commitment to the library over the many years I have been the library director. This committee and the council have always understood the library plays a crucial role in the community and the complexity of meeting the municipal appropriation to remain certified. For this, I am very grateful. I would also like to thank the Board of Library Trustees who advocate, guide, and act as a liaison to building library services and resources, and the Friends of the Library for their support and commitment to enriching our library resources and programs. The mission of the Thayer Public Library is to be an essential resource, supporting lifelong learning, provide quality services, and creating connections to community in an accessible and equitable environment for all. The librarians have worked extremely hard this past year in developing additional programs, partnering with outside organizations and vendors to provide diverse programs. The library has a regular group of mothers with infants who attend our very popular weekly Baby and Me Mindful program in the Children's Room. Recently, the group of moms mentioned this is the best part of their week. This speaks to the core of what the library provides. The library is not just what we have for people, but what we can do with people. Our value cannot always be quantified in monetary terms. We invest in people, and the return on that investment is priceless. Libraries bring people together and help build communities. Our primary focus this year has been a strategic plan, professional development, and expanding our digital resources and space planning with the goal of better serving our community. A few priorities that have been identified for FY25 based on the library's strategic plan are expanding the library's visible presence in the community, continue to develop an inclusive team culture through staff development, and to continue to evaluate the library space to provide a modern, accessible, and welcoming space for all library users. The budget is based on a 52.2-week payroll year and meets all minimum requirements for standards for the certification and the State Aid for Public Libraries Award Program. The library's budget is less than 1% of the town budget and is very lean. However, I am confident the library can still be responsive to the community's needs. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have regarding the library's FY25 budget.
Thank you so much, Director Stano. Before we move on to questions and comments, did you want to review the revolving fund?
If it's on your agenda, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, we should review that this evening, and then we will table it and vote on everything at the end. But while you're here with Assistant Director Kavanaugh, I think an overview of that would be helpful, and then I'll open it up on both components.
Sure, sure. So do you want me to, so I don't have the paperwork in front of me, but we have two revolving funds. One is capped at $45,000, that's for fines and fees, and one is capped at $5,000, and that is room rental. So together they make $50,000. We never reach. I mean, in the past we haven't reached that in a long time. So, and they can be used for library materials, so, and programming.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, at this point, and thank you, Director Stano, I will open it up to the committee members for questions, comments. Councilor Flaherty?
I don't have any questions. I just really want to say how fabulous a job I think you do.
Thank you.
I see the posts for, various programming that's happening at the library, and very often I wish I had just more time so I could show up for more of that. And then at other times, it just makes me feel very nostalgic because, especially with the children's section, many of my most fond memories of my time with my children when they were very little came from those kinds of programs. So thank you so much for continuing to work on the very slender funding that we're able to provide you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty.
Yes.
Okay, oh, Councilor Moore, go right ahead.
I want to echo Councilor Flaherty's compliments. I think it's a wonderful facility, and I could go on at length about it, but I don't want to take up others' time. Could you just educate me on the fluctuation in salary amounts for librarians from FY21 to FY25? In FY21, the actuals on current topics and titles for librarians was $653,000, and then we see a dip in the two subsequent years to the $615,000 range, and then last year it goes up to $792,382, and the proposed number now is $802. Was there additional staffing added, or?
It's all contractual. So I don't know where you're looking, but
I'm looking at current topics and titles,
yeah.
the librarians included in that program.
Page 39, I believe, right?
Yeah.
So it's really all contractual. And then we had a lot of retirements during COVID. They were unfilled. And then we filled them. It's just all contractual. So right now, it would have been higher. So they got a contractual raise, but one position's unfilled. But it's all contractual. We have the same amount of people. The pages, the page line That is different. We've, over the years, have skimmed that, but it's really all contractual.
Okay, okay.
yeah.
That's all the explanation I need. I was just wondering what the fluctuation was due to.
Yeah.
And if it's staff turnover and so forth, I get it, no problem. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I just want to add that, and I know I say this every year, but it's been a year and bears repeating. The library is one of, if not the only, civic institution we have in town that truly caters to every single resident and non-resident and visitor, baby to senior. It is fully comprehensive, it is utterly welcoming, and it is just always warm and inclusionary, and that should not be undervalued or understated. So thank you for all of your efforts in making that happen, Director Stano, to you and your staff.
Thank you.
The other thing I've learned in this role, and I want to make sure residents are aware, again, because I know how much we value education, and I lump the library in with that. In order to maintain our state certification for libraries, there's a formula, there's a mathematical formula that's required for funding. And I did the exercise over the weekend. To put a fine point on the budget, the financial trouble we're in, we're $295 away from losing our state certification for the library. $295. We would not be state certified for our library. This is a big deal. And none of us want to see that happen. And I just want people to recognize that we are barely keeping our heads above water with one of our most important and most cherished institutions in town. And I felt like it needed saying. So again, thank you for all of your work, and please pass along our gratitude to your staff.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you for noticing that.
Okay.
It's the best value in town.
It sure
It's
is.
the best value in town.
What is it, Terry? $40 a year per person?
Yeah, I didn't calculate it for this year, but yes, it's like 39 something per person. And as Councilor Reynolds knows, that it's like $5 per visit per capita. I mean, it is.
There's no better bargain in our
Well, yeah.
community. So, thank you. Okay, I think you're free. You're welcome to stay. And thank you for being here this evening. And again, if committee members or residents have questions, we can please send them in. We can get them back out to department heads as necessary. Thank you. All right, we're now moving on to Human Resources. Director Ships, welcome, and welcome to your first budget meeting. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Council President, councilors.
If you have a short statement you'd like to make, we'd be happy to hear from you. And if you prefer, we can jump into questions.
Well, maybe jump into questions. It's been a very fast month. I've been working very closely with
Just move the mic
Director,
closer
oops,
to-
sorry, Esmond, to prepare our budget. So there is a lot to look at, to go through, in a very short period of time. However, I do think we do have a responsible budget that addresses certainly the needs of the town and employees of Braintree. I'll turn it over to.
Sure, thank you, Chris. I probably just was going to emphasize three things, and Chris has been jumped right in with the budget writing process, because I think you started in the first week of April. So, but there are three thematic things that I think are important to note in the budget, and they obviously have they fall in Chris's budget and have everything to do with our important employee relations and our funding our salary budgets, as well as taking care of the costs that every town has related to its retirees' pensions and their health care costs. So in the materials under the department highlights for fiscal 25, I'm just going to really quickly walk through those, and then I think just see what questions folks have for Chris and myself. But it's important to note in this budget that we worked with the Braintree retirement system to freeze the general fund component of the pension costs at the fiscal 24 rates. Those were scheduled to increase by $817,000. So the appropriation for the town and state, town and school side is roughly 10.9, is not rough, it's 10.9 million, and that is frozen. We're still paying quite a bit. 10.9 is not an insignificant sum, but it's important for folks for our residents to understand those amounts are determined by the system's actuary for us to be able to arrive at a fully funded amount by fiscal 33, sorry. We worked with the retirement system. They reset that valuation schedule every 2 years, and they are in the process of that now. The consequence of not paying the 817 this year, this coming up year, is that will be added to the amount, the liability that needs to be funded, and then we can work with the retirement system on the updated funding schedule. They have always, I believe, worked with the town to try to smooth those increases that are put out, are scheduled, and we'll continue to work with them. But I think it's important, they took a formal action to on the 25th, so to recognize that the system did do that through its board, and it was an important step for this fiscal 25 number to be accomplishable, and we'll continue to work and collaborate with them and keep the committee and the council informed on what, as we move forward with that. On the healthcare costs, a really important part of this year's budget writing, really before Chris got to start, but when he started, we were working on it, was to forecast the needs of the trust, not just for 25, but through fiscal 28. And one other area for another long-term policy that we want to put in place is to make sure that that trust is capitalized sufficiently each year, and that's a big part of making sure that when we set the budget, as far as the town appropriation, that we're ensuring that we're maintaining an adequate funding balance of that trust. Last year, in fiscal 23, I should say, we ended with a balance of $15 million, which is in a good position. The costs of healthcare claims, though, continue to go up. And there is a degree of unpredictability that none of us really can know for sure. This year for fiscal 24, in writing the fiscal 25 budget, we are forecasting about a balance somewhere in the $12 to $14 million range, which is a good result with the town appropriation of about $9.8 million. The appropriation we're calling for in fiscal 25 is a 5% increase. That coincides with the increase for premiums paid by the employer, us, the town, as well as employees. And it will allow us to continue to maintain a projected fund balance consistent with that amount, the shooting to have an amount equal to something in that $12 to $14 million range. Why that's important is that balance would be roughly between 50 and 60% of our annual claims. So we want to make sure that the policy we put in place makes sure that the fund is well capitalized enough to cover any year and be able to cushion any increases we might see above the budget that would be unanticipated and can be subject to high variability because it really is based on any given year's employee individual health care needs. And extreme severe cases, costly cases can affect our claims in year. So it is something that's hard to predict and we need to budget for carefully. But we're looking to implement that policy, as I said, to articulate a clear balance that we want to make sure we have in place. And that will help us to have predictability and have affordability, at least manage what we're forecasting to set aside on the town budget every year to pay for these costs. And as we meet regularly with our broker and do plan design, that will be something that we will continue to make sure we're looking at a multi-year forecast. The last thing I want to note in the mayor's budget is we do file for a $1.5 million reserve, which would serve to account for the one-time costs associated with RIFs or other separations we had to do associated with implementing the fiscal 25 budget. Those costs do not show up in departments' budgets right now in what we filed, and they would be covered in this reserve. They're difficult to know. There's obviously some open question with respect to how the extent of those reductions we're going to have to take as a result of the question in the June 15th election. But this reserve would account for those costs and is our effort to make sure that we're recognizing that those are expected to occur. To what degree, we do not know. We think it's appropriate to use a one-time resource to account for those one-time costs. But should this reserve, should not all those costs be needed, we would also potentially use that reserve to fund efforts in departments to adjust to a longer-term funding reality where we're trying to not cut in the future, but maintain growth at reasonable and modest levels to stay within our revenue forecast. So that may include any number of things, but potentially bringing in business policy or business practice review to look at how we do business, trying to bring more digital government solutions, ways that we can do business more efficiently at the potentially reduced staff levels that the fiscal 25 budget contemplates. So it's an important reserve. It's not directly in the HR budget, but we thought it would be important to flag it for this discussion. And I'll see if there's any questions for us.
Thank you, Director Ships and Director Esmond. Bless you, Councilor Maglio. Do any of the committee members have questions pertaining to the HR budget? And in the books, it's on, oh, the page numbers are kind of wonky, 8 and 9, I believe. But anyway, Councilor Moore.
Good evening, and thank you for your explanation. I'm interested in how you arrived at the number that you did for workers' comp. It's 500,000. It looks like the previous 2 fiscal years you haven't experienced that level in the actual budget. Why are you increasing it?
It's my understanding there have been several settlements under workers' compensation over the past year or 2 that have driven the cost of our budget line item up to what it is now.
Okay. My second is to revisit the issue on pension funding. The freezing of the payment is appreciated. But I think that the long-term approach to this has to be more nuanced. And what we're avoiding this year is an 8.4% increase over last year's appropriation because they've frozen the rate. And that is not uncommon for pension growth amongst municipalities in the Commonwealth, and it's becoming a squeeze on budgets for city and town budgets everywhere. So the pace at which you can fund or fully fund a retirement fund, I think has to be examined more closely. We're on a 2033 schedule now. We're statutorily mandated to be on a 2040 schedule. And we are currently, we're looking at an actuarial report, we're in that time frame, that is going to inform us as to what kind of appreciation on the portfolio we can anticipate, growth in the number of retirees, life expectancy, and all that stuff. I don't think it's going to give us any news other than it's going to continue to grow in the 8% rate. Yeah. So getting a one-time freeze gives us, temporary relief. We've got to be more realistic about our capability to fund it and to fund it earlier than statutorily required. I think that is not realistic with 8% annual growth. Our revenues are not growing anywhere near that and won't be for some time. So this will drive a wedge between operational programs and this cost. It'll put pressure on how we deliver services and will compete for resources with the delivery of services. So I think a longer, more meaningful dialogue with the retirement board is necessary going forward on this to make sure that we can find a way to meet our obligations for our retirees, but do so in a way that is within our revenue.
Yeah, I agree. Counselor, thank you. I appreciate it. The point is well taken. I think, you know, I can't speak entirely for the system, but I think they extended a continued posture of collaboration and working with us. We didn't, in the meeting I last was at with them, we didn't get into that level of detail, but I think we understood that we are going to continue to want to work with them to look at options that the town can consider, and I think that, you know, would be one we would ask to be modeling out and looking at. So understood the point. I mean, I think when we're looking at the revenue side and we're talking about constraints by sort of the revenue environment we're in, we have to look at all the big areas where we grow, and this is one, on the expense side, this is one where we do, and we're doing the right thing by setting aside lots of funding to take care of this liability. But yes, agreed, it's balancing against current service, current programming, and we want to make sure that we can do our best to, balance the investments we make for now, as well as to account for those big sort of balance sheet liabilities.
Yeah, I think the board's well administered. I think they've been aggressive in obtaining expertise on making their portfolio perform in a variety of conditions. It's a well-balanced portfolio. It's managed by an outside consultant. They've done what they can do. They have been forthcoming and cooperative and collaborative in my experience. The problem is not unique to Braintree. It is inherent throughout Massachusetts that retirement funds are growing at a pace that towns can't afford. And so the schedules will have to be adjusted, and I think the state will have to step in eventually and address the schedule, which they haven't done in the last 8 years. On top of that, the whole plan that the town has had to fund post-employment benefits is to pay off this obligation and pour into OPEB. Yeah. I don't think that's feasible anymore. And I think we're going to have to look at that as well, but that's, for another time. I just think while it is helpful this year, I think we need to have a more meaningful and sustained dialogue about changing the paradigm that we have now with retirement funding. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Moran. Other questions from the committee on the HR budget? Councilor Reynolds?
Just a point of clarification, Director Shipp. On the veteran portion of your budget, I do see that we have a drop-off in the veteran benefits, ordinary veteran benefits. We do see at a state level or statewide level decreased, actually, claims. People who are, it's dropping off. For some reason, our younger veterans are not seeking any kind of benefits, and I think this number here reflects in the town of Braintree. So just to confirm, that is essentially what we're seeing here is declining claims.
That's correct.
Through our VSO. But I do want to note, I know that it's always been a tight budget. I just want to say, I do appreciate, I see the overall there were some cuts in areas to include this. benefits, but overall, I do see an increase of, I think, what do we have? An increase of $5,000 overall, 405 to 410, roughly just under 5,000, 4,995. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank
For our
you.
veteran community.
I echo that. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Reynolds. Just one point of clarification. So the $1.5 million reserve, is that in the Finance Department?
That reserve would be under the Director of Human Resources.
Oh, well, it's just not in there today. Is that what I
Oh,
misunderstood? You said it's not in the budget?
So it's in the budget motions. It would essentially be using free cash for certified free cash for fiscal '23. It's not appropriated. It's just, we've timed it with this budget, with the budget motions. So, actually, Sean brought this up too earlier. Because it's related to essentially what we're doing, we've filed it with the mayor's budget. But you wouldn't see this, a dollar amount appropriated in it. It's essentially creating a reserve using the free cash from fiscal '23, holding that in reserve for fiscal, that would be still remain available through fiscal '25.
Sean, did you want to expound on that?
Sure. So think of it like a supplemental in this case, where it's not part of your original 25 operating. It's a supplemental vote to set up this reserve for potential additional costs down the road.
Okay. But it's not, where do
So
we like see that in the details?
So you wouldn't see it in the detail per se, because what the budget book is reflecting is your overarching 25 budget. This is in addition to that, so it's not part of your original budget. Could you make the argument to include it and then show a funding source of free cash? That's one way to do it. But the way it's being presented is just a different way, if you will. I feel like I'm not clarifying this.
Do you want to add something, Counselor? So, okay, I'm sorry. So then we have what, 8 million something in free cash?
There's a schedule that we included as part of our, I think it's probably helpful, like, but let me make sure I can get you right to it. And next year, we will do tabs. I
Oh,
promise.
great, thank you.
Incremental
Continual
improvements,
improvement.
I promise. I'm sorry.
Appendix 5D.
Yeah, Appendix 5D, thanks, Sean.
Appendix.
So,
5B, local aid summary? Oh, 5D.
5D, sorry.
Yeah, I don't know where this appendix is.
It's a landscape schedule that looks like this, just a one-pager. It's titled General Fund, Free Cash, Projected Use, and Balances.
Okay. I found it. It's like, I think it's this one. It doesn't have a page. Give us one more minute while we
Sure,
get our books in order here. Counselor Magley, go ahead.
Clarification, you said something about it's being held from FY '23?
Right, so the free cash that
Free
it would be
cash.
funded from is the free cash that was authorized at the, going back to essentially the close of fiscal '23. So that essentially is free cash that's available for appropriation in fiscal '24. I think the best way to think of this appropriation is, as Sean said, it's essentially like a supplemental appropriation for this fiscal year. We would use free cash that's available this fiscal year, but make it available through fiscal '25 as a reserve for the purposes of defraying costs that are in fiscal '25 associated with RIFs and other personnel separation. So that is that's the linkage with the fiscal '25. We could have, I suppose, filed this as a separate standalone motion outside of the mayor's budget. But since it's linked to what we filed on for fiscal '25, we made that connection. That's why it's in here.
And the way I look at it too is similar to that same page, Ron, with the $4 million transfer to stabilization fund. It's part of the overall budget presentation, budget book, but it's not necessarily a fiscal year 25 operating line item. So that amount is not located in someone's department. It's not located as a other financing use. It's sort of outside of that spectrum.
Because it was appropriated, it was approved in FY23 for FY24 and not spent, except for pieces of it.
Currently,
right?
yes.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is for the Ways and Means Committee and Town Council ultimately to make it, to decide on. We would be filing it and asking for its consideration coinciding with the mayor's budget, essentially.
So is there like a placeholder currently for that amount that was approved for FY24? So it's sort of a piece of the current free cash?
It's accounted for here, yes, if that makes sense.
So we had 11 point, maybe this counselor, we had, and correct me if I'm wrong, Director Esmond, we had 11.9 in free cash at the beginning of the year.
Correct.
We're using 1.5 for this payroll reorganization reserve, which is what we're talking about right now.
Correct, yep.
We have the 921, which we talked about at the beginning of the meeting, in the event that the Municipal Empowerment Act does not pass.
Yep.
The 2 million in supplementals, which we've already appropriated at our last meeting. And then 4 million is being put into a stabilization fund.
Yes, our stabilization reserve. This is the MGL authorized stabilization reserve that right now we currently have. We closed last year with a balance of about $9,800.
Yep.
So that would be, it's a reserve account very much for the same exact purposes that we use free cash for. But it's a demonstration that we're looking to begin to replenish our reserves and the traditional reserves that should be set aside for purposes of a true rainy day fund. That's what it is.
Okay. So that takes our free cash down to 3.5-ish million.
Correct.
From what, okay. And I appreciate the level of detail on this. This does not include the override, $1.5 million override
No.
stabilization, or?
Correct, it does not include that. It would be an entirely separate reserve held, and every year in the subsequent years, we would presumably draw something out of that reserve. We would capitalize it with $1.5 million and then draw what, hopefully, we would be able to limit the draws, but we would time those draws over the course of the next ensuing 3 fiscal years to mitigate the gap closing, the budget balance over the 3 years, really extending the benefit of the override over 3 additional years.
It's like a safeguard.
Essentially, yes.
Okay. Thank you for walking us through that, me through that. I appreciate it. So let's finish up with HR. Are there any other HR questions? We veered a little off course, but thank you for bearing with us, Director Ships. Okay. Just before we close out this portion of the meeting, are there any other questions pertaining to the override, which I know we didn't really touch on during the first part of the evening with the revenue? So I just want to, before we sort of move on to the next section, Councilor Flaherty?
Thank you. So you were just now talking about the 1.5 million that is planned to be moved into an override stabilization account should the override pass.
Correct.
Can you explain, so I can understand, how you anticipate this fund will be used in our budget and why the administration has determined to distribute funding this way instead of directing it towards staffing or programming in the various departments that we have?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Councilor. So, and I know it's not uncomplicated, but I think there are ways that we want to continue to try to make it as clear as possible. It is a budgeting tool that we're implementing as a way, as I said, to extend the benefit of the override. The benefit of it versus spending it in the first year is that it allows us to manage the base spending from fiscal 25 into 26, 27, and 28 at a lower level, and while at the same time reserving funds to help mitigate the continued challenge we face where the town's revenues, as we've discussed them and presented them, are under pressure to continue to grow or struggle to grow at the same pace of expenses. So what this reserve allows us to do when we capitalize it in fiscal 25 is allow those funds to be used in subsequent fiscal years to help bring the budget into balance as we start to see revenues and expenses potentially grow at different rates and potentially that imbalance continues. It's a tool communities use when they're asking for a revenue raise of the levy so that we can extend, as I say, but ensure that we've got another resource available to us that is a recurring resource, while some of it has been set aside for future use, that's going to help us live in the sort of reality of the revenue growth and the spending growth. If it was spent all in one year, the challenge is essentially twofold. That's a greater base expenditure that will continue to grow and be potentially growing at a faster rate than revenue. So we've got a bigger base spend. And then we also forego having that ability to have those reserves in place. So it essentially is, it's a safeguard, but it also will allow us to have, it's going to ensure the goal is to be able to go and ask the residents to increase the levy in fiscal 25, but know that we have a plan not to come back through 28 and set those spending targets and those revenue goals that we're shooting for to be able to be at best foot forward to live to that.
When you say that this helps us be able to be confident that we wouldn't have to go back to the residents to ask for additional funding through fiscal year 28, does that mean that you are anticipating that by then we would have built up other streams of revenue to the extent that we wouldn't need to do that anyway? Or are you indicating that you think after fiscal year 28, we may very well need to make this request a second time?
I think I definitely don't want to signal the latter because it's just, it's not the intent. I think what we're trying to do is more clearly articulate it's the intent that we won't for sure, that we have a plan to make sure that this revenue can last on a recurring basis through fiscal 28. Sorry, Sean, to keep pushing my arm.
You're fine.
That's really the goal. It's not going to be accomplished without us making sure that we're able to keep spending at modest growth targets. That's an important part of this, and that we are able to begin to bring in new revenue from a outside of just the regular revenue confines we have right now. So it's a multiple layered approach that we need to employ, but it's at least the intention that we are through fiscal 28, that we put together a credible plan to get us to that through fiscal 28 and ensure we're able to account for the structural budget challenges we've been articulating and put us in a good foot forward to hopefully be beyond that and to have the balance between revenues and expenses, which is what we're trying to. That's the goal, really, to make sure that we're not asking for new revenue, but we're able to stay within that level.
Okay, I think that helps me understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Esmond. Any other comments from the committee? Sean, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, not specifically. I know Director Esmond and I met earlier today to just go over questions I had, similar to the questions you've already had too, just make sure I had a good understanding, as this is obviously the first budget book we've seen from this director and this mayor too. So no additional questions at this time.
Thank you. And Sean, will you still be submitting your annual memo to the committee?
Yep, of course.
Okay. Thank you. All right. That wraps up our budget hearings for the evening. Clerk Semino, do we need to do the motions now, the tabling? Okay. Do we have a motion to table Order 24020 to May 8th, 2024?
Madam Chair, I would move to table order 24020 to May 2024.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That is unanimous. Do we have a motion to table 24021, which is the FY 2025 Budget Community Preservation Committee, or take up any action relative thereto? That will be tabled, if there is a motion, to May 20th.
Madam Chair, I would move to table order 24021 to May 20th, 24.
Second, is there a
Second.
second? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that is unanimous. And do we have a motion to continue the revolving funds, which is 24022? Those will be continued to the final budget hearing.
Madam Chair, I would,
I'm sorry, thank you, Clerk Semino, May 13th. Table to May 13th.
Madam Chair, I would move to table order 24022 to May 13th, 2024.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That is unanimous. Okay. I would ask if there's a motion for a 5-minute recess before we move on to the next 2 items on our agenda, just to give everyone a quick break.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we will convene at 8:52. No, 8:02. Sorry, everyone. 8:02. everyone being with us this evening. All right, we're moving on to 24018. Okay, moving on to 24018, Mayor authorization to accept a donation for the Nelson Chin Memorial Fund or take up any action relative thereto. Director Esmond, did you want to say anything on this, or?
I didn't have any prepared comments. I think it's hopefully pretty straightforward.
Yes, I would agree. We do have, counselors do have the memo in front of them, but it is a $30,000 donation from the Nelson Chin Memorial Foundation to the Recreation Department. So thank you to the Nelson Chin Memorial Foundation. Any questions or comments? All right, in that case, do we have a motion for Order 24018?
Madam Chair, I would move that the town of Braintree be and hereby is authorized in accordance with Section 53A of Chapter 44 of the Mass General Laws to accept the following gift upon the conditions and attached and herein set forth. Donor Nelson Chin Memorial Foundation, gift $30,000. Purpose Recreation Department Program.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That is unanimous, and thank you very much. We are now moving on to 24019, Mayor, FY 2024 Supplemental Appropriation Number 2, or take up any action relative thereto. Is there anyone from the Mayor's office? Director Esmond, would you like to speak to this item?
I'll just introduce really quickly, and do all the members have the matrix that we provided? So thank you. So I'm going to sort of assume we might want to sort of tackle this by major category.
Yep.
But this it consists essentially of primarily, for the most part, most of the items, at least in number, are what I would call closeout items, where we're bringing appropriations in line with the forecasted need. There are, of course, the departments here to talk about some of the cases where there is obviously a bit more for discussion. Particularly, I know Jim and Sarah are here to discuss the school supplemental. I just would probably lastly want to just talk quickly about our approach to funding. As we've said, we are trying this year to limit free cash to be used for supplementals. So while the appropriations, while essentially the total sum of this supplemental is substantial, in excess of $1 million, it is fully paid for with account reversions, and no free cash. So that is where we've identified there are fund balances or accounts available to be reverted and essentially budget rescissions or fund sweeps that we can do, because we've identified either the available funding is no longer needed, particularly in Fund 002, or alternative funding sources can be provided for those purposes, primarily with capital projects where there is other capital authorizations that can replace really longstanding general fund capital appropriations that have been in place in many cases for several years. The approach here is, again, just to really limit the use of free cash, retain that as a funding source to support the fiscal 25 budget, as well as to limit the use and let it continue as a reserve as an alternative in the reserve of last resort with respect to supplemental funding. So I'll open with those remarks, and then I don't know if it makes sense to have the right team present.
Thank you.
Next.
Thank you, Director Esmond. So let's take it, I think that's a good suggestion. We can start with the school department. Superintendent Lee and I know our finance director, Sarah Kaufman, are here. Thank you for sticking with us. So are there any questions from the committee members on the school supplemental, which is in total, I believe, 900,000-ish?
997.
Thank you, 997. Thank you, Sean.
Why it's 747?
It's 747.
Yeah, but how you get that?
Oh, that's the question. Sorry.
Yeah. That one, please.
So we were able to identify an additional $200,000 in revolving can you hear me better? Both revolving accounts and a circuit breaker reserve relief that should be coming from the state towards the end of May to close that gap.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah,
I didn't catch it.
So maybe I can just clarify. The mayor's supplemental files for 747. In the narrative, the actual deficiency we're articulating before revenue offsets is 997. So there's a $250,000 difference, which is essentially resources that the department has identified that can defray some portion of the file of the total deficiency.
did you have a follow-up on that, Counselor?
Yeah. Could I have I'd just like some more detailed explanation on the, what is articulated in this explanation. The department's reported a deficiency of an estimated 997 key factors, including costs of special education increasing beyond budgeted levels, including increasing staffing for new programming to keep students in district as well as bring students back. So I would presume that those efforts were made to reduce costs, but they ended up costing more than you budgeted anyway?
I'll handle that one. And first, good evening. Good to see you all. Yes, the cost would have been higher if we had not taken such steps. In terms of bringing kids back within the program, there's a cost associated with that because they need a certain level of staffing once they return to the school.
Can you give me an idea of what the higher cost would have been?
We had kids coming back from out-of-district placements close to $180,000 a year. And so bringing them back with a teacher or a para that is under $80,000 a year. So we can make up the money that way.
And the remainder of this is due to salary increases?
Salary and inflationary trends. I mean, unfortunately, we're here. We do not like, obviously, to come back for supplementals. I'm sure nobody does. Typically, in a given year, we can cover certain expenses that we didn't anticipate by moving money around within our existing budget. This year, between the collective bargaining agreement that was agreed upon after the budget was initially passed, and some extraordinary special education costs that we experienced. There was also discussion, private school out-of-district placements in the state were allowed to increase their tuition rates by 14%. There was promises of relief coming from the state to alleviate some of that. It materialized only in the way that Ms. Kaufman just described. There was the ability to borrow from next year's circuit breaker money to bring it back into the current budget.
Right, so they basically increased the amount that the providers could pay their workers and then charge that additional cost to the communities, but did not subsequently make up for the additional costs to the communities as a result of those increases.
Correct. And for us, in Braintree in particular, the cost is approximately $750,000.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Counselor Moore. And Counselor Maglio.
So just for clarification, when students are brought back in district, it's not for cost savings, it's because it's a more appropriate placement for them?
Our primary goal is to put them in the best educational situation possible. There are massive benefits to having kids go to school in their hometowns with their peers. Where it's appropriate, we bring them back. Where it's not appropriate, we still have a great number of kids who are in out-of-district placements because that's where their services are best delivered. But when we can identify a situation where the kid would benefit from coming back, there is a cost-saving component. I would not ignore that fact, but that's not the primary driver.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Counselor Maglio. Counselor Flaherty.
Thank you. So just so I understand, you're saying that if the students had remained out of district in their placements, which you must have budgeted for, or like, I guess what is confusing about this is they were out of district, which is more expensive. So we brought them in district, which is less expensive, but you must have budgeted for them to be out of district. So how is bringing them back in district more expensive than having them out of district?
Because the number of students in that situation is not static. So for a student that we might have brought back, we might have had to send another student out. So when we talk about special education in the post-COVID environment, special ed services are becoming more extreme and extraordinary, and we have a number of kids who have needed services that cannot be delivered within the school system. So yes, other kids went out, but where we could identify an appropriate return, we did that because that saves us money overall. You know, the other compounding factor to this is because of over time, you know, we've had to cover the overall school budget using circuit breaker money, ESSER monies. The reserves that we had in circuit breaker were lower than normal, and we couldn't cover that cost internally, which is something we would have done in the past.
As we know that special education costs are only on the rise
Yes.
due to multiple factors, do we have a plan to kind of alter the built environment of our school, or, you know, add programming that will address those needs to a greater extent so that we can continue to bring them back into our own community and educate them here? Or is it really just are the needs just too complex for us to realistically manage that?
When we look to add a program within the district, we're looking at the number of students who require that service. To create programming for 1 or 2 students is not a good idea. There's not enough critical mass for them to have a positive school-wide experience, and at the same time, it's not cost-effective for us. You know, today was the Mass Association of School Committees Day on the Hill, and talking to the legislative body, they were talking about the state taking over some of the extraordinary special education expenses, because every community is going through what we're going through as it relates to special education. The cost of special education has increased significantly, but alongside of that, the cost of transporting the kids to those programs has also increased exponentially. In some cases, we're spending as much to send the kid physically to the school than to actually attend the school. And so as these numbers become so extreme and as communities' budgets become tighter and tighter, there does need to be a longer-term thought process in terms of how we resolve these issues as a state, because it's having a major impact on education across the Commonwealth.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Councilor Reynolds?
Welcome, Superintendent. Welcome. So I just want to recap some of the questions that have been asked and some of your answers, just to make sure that I'm have got this correct. Or I have this correct. Pardon me. The majority of your increased costs here are associated primarily with special education, and were there mandated increases to your operations within the year from the state that also contribute to this amount?
Not in terms of special education mandates go along with the individual educational plans of all the students. So the number of kids requiring services has increased, and the types of services that they need has increased as well and become more significant. Now, the other component of our being here this evening is the collective bargaining agreement. The budget we passed back in last May came before we actually settled the contract with the union, and that's 95% of our staff. So in a typical year, we would have been able to cover the increase within our existing budget, but for all the factors I've described, we just simply are unable to this year.
And you had anticipated my next question. So if I recall, the actual contract was signed after the budget was approved for fiscal '24, and you had anticipated roughly 2% as an increase as a result of those negotiations. Was it not anticipated also that the additional benefit or benefit of the longevity payments and the parental leaves, was that something that was introduced above and beyond your first assumptions?
The longevity, yes, but the market adjustment was the amount of money we thought we were going to be able to cover internally, because we've been in a position to do things like that in the past. But then again, colliding with special education increases and transportation increases and basic inflationary trends, we were unsuccessful.
Okay, at this, I'm also just want to try to understand from my understanding as we move forward. I know that we're looking at another contract looming quickly, actually, because of the fact that it took so long to get this.
December.
Right, exactly. So this is information that I think would be helpful to all of us for a better understanding and a set of expectations going into that particular contract. To your point, we don't want to shortchange our teachers. However, but because of the overall situation the town of Braintree finds itself in, that there has to be recognition of certain benefits that have been provided, and that all of us in one way or another are tightening our belts and deferring perhaps some benefits that we would like to have presently, but, so, thank you.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Reynolds. Any other comments or questions? Just so I'm clear, that you said $200,000 is going to be covered by the state of the 940 or the 970?
It's circuit breaker reimbursement based on the 14% increase. We're actually, the way the state has arranged it, we're actually borrowing from money we would have received next year. It's coming back into this year.
So we could be back in this position next year then if we're borrowing against FY25?
Well, the increase from OSD this year is 4.5%, it's not 14%, which is still above the 2% it had been running at for almost a decade, but we're in a better position to manage it this year.
Okay. And that doesn't require a legislative vote, does it? Or is that?
That's already done.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that explanation, and thank you both for sticking with us tonight. I know you already worked a full day today, so appreciate you being here. Anything else before we let the school department go? Okay.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we have, oh, I think we do it all at the end, right? Do we do all the motions at the end, Clerk Semino? Yeah. Thank you, though, Peter. Assessing inspections, did you have anything on that, Director Esmond, 15,000?
Right, yes. So just very quickly, the 15,000 would fund through the remainder of this fiscal year and into next fiscal year, a consultant focused on inspections to help us maintain and keep up with our 10-year requirement to inspect every property. So this is something that we want to make sure we're staying on schedule for, and we have not had, there was not funding in the 24 budget set aside for this purpose, but it's important for us to be able to do this and make sure that we're staying on top of this. It's a workload that really needs to be funded every year, and I think what we'll be looking for fiscal 25, well, fiscal 26 and beyond would be to look for other funding sources that might be better linked to this, for example, using the overlay surplus reserve that we would have, since this is obviously has a nexus with the assessors and the funding that we set aside for that. So I can answer any other questions about this. I would say that in fiscal, for the finance focused discussion for fiscal 25, we will make sure we cover the full program of the assessor's office and have a detail of that, including the valuation services contracts I spoke of before.
Thank you. Questions on assessing? Councilor Maglio?
So this question we could push over to when we're currently talking about that full office, but my question that comes up that I think others might have as well if they're listening, how do these inspections happen? A, are we in compliance? When was the last time assessments were done? Town assessed properties, does that mean a variety of any properties, or is it town-owned properties? And I'll stop there.
So, so just the inspections themselves are of residential and commercial properties that we're talking about here. So we're not talking about town-owned properties. We're actually talking about all of the properties in the communities. What this does is currently our in our assessing team, we do try to complete, and we're not out of compliance, but this is a recommendation by the Department of Revenue for communities to stay on top of this, including making new and hiring consultants if and when it's necessary, and that's where we feel it's necessary at this point. What we're talking about, the work that they do, is visiting the home in a clearly labeled car with making sure folks are aware of the purpose. They will ask if they can visit the property, actually measure the property's components, and actually view if they can access the inside the property, just to make sure that our records are up to date as best as possible for each of the properties. The reason the 10-year schedule is set is that it's very difficult to do that. Stay on that, in any more frequency. So it's a rule that we're not out of compliance and we want to keep up with. And it is something that we do regularly get, like any community, get questions from the Department of Revenue of to make sure that we're up to date and complying with or meeting that standard.
And are the addresses, is this a random, how is that body of work assigned?
I actually don't know how those are selected. I wouldn't imagine it's random, since that seemed like it would be somewhat inefficient. And I think we try to notify, I think even through the police department, to let folks know that someone in the community with a marked car is coming and taking pictures, etc. So I don't think, I could probably get you more information of how they determine that, but I don't think it would be random.
Okay. I have one more follow-up. So then, how have those been happening when they're not done with someone coming in and doing an inspection? Because assessments have been happening,
You're right.
just not in
Yeah,
person.
and this doesn't, I should say this, the assessments happen every year and get updated, the valuations. This is really making sure that the underlying data that those are based on is accurate. And those don't need to happen every year. I mean, people, when they do extensions some work in their house that's permitted, will have that information. So there is also some degree where that actually is helpful to keep these up to date. And that allows us to update those cards. This is more of in cases where we've got properties that haven't had that in some time. And so there are staff that we have, that can do it from time to time, but it is a decent workload, and we want to make sure that, for example, the consultants we would be talking about, presumably, would come from a community of folks that are retired and might do this on a part-time basis, who are specialized in understanding what it is to do this work efficiently, to really kind of give us a little more additional surge of manpower, particularly in the seasons where it's easiest and best to do it, like summer, late spring, as opposed to winter.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Anything else on assessors? Okay, let's move on to general fund debt service. The excitement never stops.
Yeah, this is essentially to bring appropriations that are currently in line with the actual costs for debt service forecasted for the year for our debt schedule. The 26.6 here represented here is, I think, consistent with previous years where we've budgeted for a debt service number, but until we actually sold the debt, which typically happened after the budget was filed, there would be a mismatch that needed to be corrected. So that's what this is, essentially.
Okay, so this one's kind of like a pro forma expected. It's not a ton of money, but this is what we would expect from a supplemental, so to speak?
Yes.
Okay.
And you can see we have one for golf, as well as water and sewer have this as well, but they have the ability and appropriation reserve inside their budget that lets them essentially account for the differential. But really, every debt service funding fund, that's a mouthful, but has some element of this because of the timing by which we know the costs of the debt that need to be paid in every year.
Thank you. Any other questions on this one? Okay. Insurance premiums, Director?
Yep, that's me too. So this is somewhat analogous, but there's a wrinkle that there were some extraordinary costs this year. So this funds deficiencies in both the premium line and in the deductible costs. So for the premium, somewhat similar, we file a budget based on guidance we get from Maya, which we use to, that essentially serves as our broker, or essentially that helps us get all of our lines of coverage based on underwriting and updates that may happen before the budget or during the following year, ensuing year. There are changes to the cost of the premium, which may require a supplemental funding to be provided. What complicates it the last several fiscal years, including in fiscal 25, is that we are still continuing to see upward pressure on a lot of the coverage lines, particularly in property, but in other lines as well, casualty as well. So the underwriting process, has been a challenge when you finally get to get the actual premium. 84,000 of the 134 is associated with additional cost of premium for fiscal 24, apologize. The additional 50 is for a deductible that we anticipate will be paid this fiscal year, associated with work we're doing to repair the, right outside the building, the playground, and that's moving forward, and we expect that we will get a bill for fiscal 24 to cover the deductible, which is 50,000.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on this one? All right, let's hit fire department, 173, and I know Mary Ann, thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Did any of the counselors have questions on the fire department additional supplemental? And again, this is a transfer, right? Yes. Counselor Reynolds.
And welcome, Mary, nice to see you again. The fund costs such as retro pay, could you explain what the retro pay is?
It was, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
No, just if you could put it a little closer,
Yeah.
thank you.
It is contractual. It was for the chief's salary that wasn't paid for, I think it was 2 years.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure I'm following. So the chief...
The chief's, he didn't sign his contract. His contract wasn't signed.
Oh, okay, I see. So he had signed a contract after the fact, when his previous contract had expired. There was a point in time that then went by where
Yes.
he was performing in the role, but you did a look back, essentially, from the end of his previous contract to
Correct.
the time that the new contract took effect, that space in between.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Anything else for fire? I have no questions either, so I think you're all set, Mary Ann. Thank you for,
Great.
thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Chief Cahoon and Mary Kenny, thank you for sticking with us. Police Department in the amount of $224,000 for utilities repairs, et cetera. I don't know if you have any statement or you want us, if there's any questions. Any questions from the committee members? Councilor Flaherty.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I just want to comment that the primary reason I don't have any questions on this is because between the department heads and the finance director, they're finding sources of existing funds within departments to close the gaps. And that's what the jobs of department heads and the finance director are. And I'm pleased to see that they're doing that and doing it in an effective way. I think, so that's why, whereas if this was all free cash, I'd be asking a lot more questions, but you're using what has been previously appropriated in a different way and you're asking for the council's permission. So that is a marked difference than looking to be bailed out through funds that aren't in your departments or aren't previously appropriated. I appreciate the effort, and I just wanted to explain that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Moran.
Thank you, Council.
I would like to say, and I know Mary Ann and others have just left, but we appreciate everyone being here this evening and being prepared. And I think it speaks so highly of all the department heads that we don't have a lot of questions, so please know I don't want you to feel like, oh my God, I sat here for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, for no questions, because it is, it means a lot. I think I speak for the entire committee to say we appreciate you being available to us, and doesn't go unnoticed to you, Chief Mary Ann, or anybody else who stays with us. So thank you. Because I know everybody has worked a long, full day. And we can't wait for all the budget hearings to follow.
We can't wait either.
But now you don't have to come back tomorrow, so thank you. I think we're set, unless Director Esmond, you had anything else you wanted to add on police?
No.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Okay, on that vein, moving on to DPW, snow and ice. Director Arsenal, Assistant Director Ben Hulk, thank you for being here. Echo those sentiments for sticking with us. So this one is for snow and ice. Do any of the committee members have questions on this one? Go ahead, Councilor Flaherty, please.
Thank you. Snow and ice. We did not have very much snow. So I'm just curious, like, how we wound up with a $47,000 deficiency. Were there cost changes in the materials and so forth?
So I'll just say a few things, and then Ben has much more detail. But overall, when you have snow operations, whenever we go out there, we have to spread salt out on the roads all over the place. And so basically, we have to spread salt out. We got to get our internal staff to go out and work on it. And even it may seem like it's not very, like a lot going on, but the icing was quite a bit this past year. And we did have a couple of events that we had to take care of. And also the contractors, when they come out, some of the big events we had, one of them was kind of didn't go as planned, but that's what happens when you have snow operations. Sometimes you mount up and then things don't proceed the way you thought they were going to be. But there's a whole process. Like you go in, and sometimes you just put the salt down, and then sometimes you have to do some plowing, and it changes all the time. It fluctuates. But every time the staff come out, and every time we have to salt, the biggest costs is basically the salt and the contractors. The regular staff do cost money, but it's not as expensive. But Ben can break it down to you a little more detail for you. So.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think the primary drivers were we hadn't raised our snowplow contractor rates since 2018, and just to get existing contractors to come back and stay, to entice new contractors in the door. The snowplow outside contractors received about a 15% pay increase. Again, it hadn't been done since 2018. In addition to the sign-on bonus, we institute a early paperwork. The guys, contractors get their contracts in, get everything signed, all their insurance requirements, all this other stuff, and they get a bonus per piece of equipment, provided it's done by the date we specify, which is usually November 20th, plus or minus a couple of days, wherever that Friday falls. So that accompanied with also the couple of storms that we did do the full plowing operation with the new South Middle School. We have a lot more asphalt surface up there, and we, to keep up with the demands on the snow, we added a third contractor front-end loader to maintain the large parking lots. Generally, we have two contracted loaders up at the high school, and this year, again, with the new building and the new layout up there, and the need with all the cutouts and the need to pull everything, as much snow as possible, away from the school, away from the perimeter, which is our standard process. We felt it was needed to have an additional loader up there. So that's basically where the drivers were, an increase to the contractors' rates.
And for a couple of years, we've helped out a little bit with the insurance, like as Ben was saying, because they basically were going to go if they didn't get something. So because they were, the big issue is the insurance, so it helps them with that. So insurance, yeah. Sorry.
Councilor Moore?
Do we have a stockpile of sand and salt in our sheds for next year that we're holding on to?
Yes, standard practice. Basically, we top off after every storm, because you never know when when the last one is going to be, so yes, we've
No,
got
it's a good time of year to get it.
Yeah, relatively, it's not bulging out the door, there's a little bit of room, but we're good for next year.
All right. I
And that's a
appreciate
process that is market-driven.
Yep.
The price actually did come down a little bit last year from what it had been. It had been historically rising, but we bid with the Town of Medfield. They go out and they do the legwork for us. We're very appreciative of that. There's 10 or 15 of our local towns that all go in on the same. They do all the procurement, they do all the advertising, and then we reap the benefits of getting the bid process.
All right. Thank you.
Counselor Reynolds?
Here. So I'm looking back in the budget book. This snow and ice line item has pretty much, it's been level funded at the same amount going back to 2023 anyways, is what we see in front of us. And I guess I just want to point out that, so you incurred additional costs this year specific for signing drivers up. Is that what I heard? You paid
The
more?
costs were larger this year than they were last year because we did increase the rates. It's a yearly thing. We have our bonuses, we have our contractor rates. We try to get everybody signed on. Yes, there was a larger monetary value to that this
Right.
year.
Okay. And that you also had an additional facility with the new online of the New South, correct?
Yep.
That was a little bit more work that you had to do. You just finished describing that, the need for a front-end loader at that location. So my point here is that you were actually asked to do more with the same budget. What was a saving grace for us was the fact that we didn't have a heavy snow season.
Correct,
We
yes.
would have been looking at a heck of a lot more than $47,000.
Yes.
Yeah, my recollection last year is we actually came in just a little bit under that number, and we returned a couple of dollars back to the town. And yeah, this year, correct, we're slightly over. 47 is
I mean, it's
more
an
than slightly, but
Yeah, and it's an inexact science. I mean, it is like almost throwing a dart at a dartboard and saying, oh, that's the number we're going to go with. Understanding, of course, using averages and various things like that, but, I mean, I follow the Farmer's Almanac, the old Farmer's Almanac, and they're very inconsistent. I mean, so weather predictions are a very difficult thing. However, I mean, you know, you've got a good ability when weather is tracking in the season. It's just looking out over 6
Correct.
months into the future, which is very difficult. So I'd have to commend you for what you were able to do. And, you know, it's a good practice as we move forward because our belts are tighter. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. I just have one comment / question. It may be for Director Esmond, it may be for you, Director Arsenal. So if we hadn't raised our contractor rates since 2018, what is our plan for being competitive in the market and not having, you know, like Councilor Reynolds said, thankfully, we had like 2 snow or ice events, or maybe minimal snow or ice events. But if we hadn't raised our contractor rates in 6 years, what is the plan to remedy that?
So we have raised it a little bit in the past, and then also recently we've raised it too as well. So it's you know, when Ben goes out, I think, you know, we checked around to see what the rates look like in other communities and get an idea what those rates are, and we want to be competitive in relation to that. I don't know if, Ben, you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yearly, we reach out to the local communities, surrounding communities that are similar in size, et cetera. Hey, it's funny because someone starts the email chain and then everybody else is looking for everybody else's rates. So we're constant, every year we do, and up until 23, we were still, you know, mean to a little bit above median, and then finally everybody else around, all the surrounding towns, had caught up. I'm sure you saw it on the news all the last, you know, every 2 years anyway since COVID, just every town, every city looking for additional help. But we do reach out, we get the rates from the surrounding towns, and we make sure that we're, you know, mid to slightly high, you know, higher than mid, to make sure we retain our contractors.
Okay.
Are you also talking about the actual budget itself, like the amount?
No, I thought I had heard that we hadn't raised our rates in the, first of all, I appreciate this is only $47,000. To Counselor Reynolds' point, it's not an exact science. But I also want to make sure that had we had a different an extreme weather event, that this could have been significantly more. And I thought I had heard you say it was because our rates had not been competitively increasing, so we didn't budget appropriately. Understanding snow and ice is not an exact science, but now it sounds like we had been raising our rates.
We'd been monitoring surrounding rates. We had our rates set in 2018 was the last time prior to last year. So they were adjusted in 2018. The rates were stagnant for 5 years, and then in 2023, we increased them again. I believe the letter, it was actually after, it would have been after budget season too. We requested it.
And also, Counselor, I always ask every year, are you comfortable with the rates? We don't want to lose people, so we've always been, both of us have been looking at the rates and making sure that we're staying competitive. And if, during those years, Ben had thought it was adequate at that time. We did, there were some other incentives, but nothing substantial to the actual rates, so.
And the rate increase, the request through the mayor's office went in for effective of October 1st, 2023. So again, that was kind of after the start of the budget process. Again, monitoring, seeing some of these other things, hearing from several of the contractors over the summertime, like, I don't think we're going to do it this year. Like,
Right, so it wasn't that we had
we're really
kept pace.
reevaluating, because they reach out as well, because they're trying to plan their work through the winter. But hey, your insurance rate's going up. Hey, your regular pay rate's going up. Geez, So through some of that, and again, checking the other towns, we could, discussed it internally, discussed it with the former administration, and again, effective October, that's when the new rates for the last snowplow season went in.
But it's a big balancing act, because you don't want to, go too high, which we don't want to pay more than we have to, but we don't want to go too low, and then we don't have the resources, so it's a balancing act, so.
Understood. Okay, one other question related then. Do we have to go through a formal procurement process for these contractors? Okay.
No, thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the explanation.
But we always have signed contracts and everything, normal things for ourselves, so, for the town to defend, make sure they have insurance and all that stuff, so.
Yep. No, thank you. I'm good. Okay. Anything else for DPW, snow and ice? Okay, thank you very much.
Golf.
I think we should take golf all at once, even though they're separated on this form, if everyone's okay with that. Darren, thank you so much for staying with us. I feel like we should have brownies or something for people to eat, snacks. It's been a long night. Yeah.
A food facility, so.
Yeah. All right, so for golf, it looks like we have 370,000? A little bit more. And this is all coming out of the golf?
Retained earnings.
Retained
Free
earnings.
cash, I guess, would be golf.
Yep. So do counselors have any questions on the golf request for transfers? Yes, please, Counselor Reynolds.
Chair, thank you. So what I see this evening as a result of this request is a sustainability of the golf enterprise account and golf operations. You are realizing a return on your investments from the past.
Yeah.
This is a good story, and I'm glad that this is something now, due to those past investments, that we have an opportunity to reap some revenue. Not only just the revenue, now this is something I'm curious about as well that I wanted to discuss with the mayor's office, but it's here in front of us tonight that you're paying back what in the past the general fund essentially can keep or help cover certain costs.
Some tough years.
Tough years, right. Just discussion around snow and ice, well, weather also has a significant impact on the operations of the golf course in a number of different ways, from a maintenance standpoint, but just, flooding, et cetera, things of that nature, droughts, too many rainy seasons, or days in terms of not having the full course available to golfers, therefore not maximizing the opportunity to bring in revenues. So I'm glad to hear this. I'm glad to see this. My hope is this will continue to be a good story, and to see your free cash, or that your profit margins increase as well, as a partner to the entire community, town government. It's a stabilizing piece that I'm hoping will continue this good story.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you, Councilor. We have had our challenges. Last year was the second rainiest year in history for Boston, and that was certainly tough for us. And we did quite well. We had 20 large outings last year, which really kept revenue strong. We're in a strong position to finish out the fiscal year. The year before that was a top 5 drought, so climate change has certainly left us struggling with how we're going to maintain year to year, but we're happy on the pace that we're at. And the Gen Zs and millennials post-COVID have really given golf a shot in the arm that seems to be sustaining into years to come. So I have a positive outlook about where we're going.
Thank you, Councilor. Thank you, Darren.
Thank you.
All right, the last item for the supplemental is Mayor's Office. Oh, go ahead, Sean.
Very much. On the $100,000 repayment, is that the last repayment, or is there more to come?
No, there is a total of $326 to $684,000.
Okay, awesome.
So my intent is to see when we get free cash or the retained earnings for the golf course certified in the fall, that if we have a competitive year this year, that we'll be able to take care of the rest of that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for that, Sean. Thank you, Darren.
Thank you.
Okay, Mayor's Office,
Right.
300,000.
So I'll be brief. This reserve is a new item that we're asking for your consideration. This reserve would be made available under the mayor's office, appropriated this year, but be continuing into fiscal '25. And it's the main intent for this is to allow for funding to be put in place where really there hasn't been funding set aside to help us live with the fiscal '25 and potentially future lower spending levels that we're asking departments to live at. If I could just take 2 minutes to make a couple observations that I've had in my 2 months. For a lot of reasons that are outside of the control of our departments, they have been asked and they have hit cut targets that are extremely challenging for them. And they've had to do this in a way that I think, if we're all being honest, it's not based on the way that we would like to reduce spending, where we're actually have a data-driven decision-making. While no one wants to cut expenses, allows us to say we're mitigating to the greatest extent possible these reductions. So what am I talking about literally? For the purpose of this reserve, this would allow and fund us to do, to set aside funding to fund business process reviews, gap assessments, potentially technology software associated with the findings of those results, so that we can find ways to do the business of our organizations, of our departments, at reduced funding levels in more efficient and effective ways. This would be things like, potentially helpfully enhancing our digital government, trying to push as much of our business online in the way that we communicate with each other online. A huge part of this is absolutely munis. We have to try to figure out how to best maximize our use of that. This might help fund additional consulting work beyond what we have on our current agreement, but it's not the limitation of this. There's all types of other ways that we need to look at how we do business, including just literally how divisions within a department or divisions between departments are working with one another. There's still a lot of paper, there's still a lot of manual processes. So this would allow us a funding source that frankly has been cut. We don't have funds set aside right now to do the things that we need to do to hopefully invest in, again, the best way to live at lower numbers. Right now, conceptually, we envision that this funding could be available for any number of engagements or a number of engagements across all of town government, so that would include the schools as well. They obviously have had a very challenging, fiscal 25 development process, and this would help hopefully fund efforts for them to look at their own business and including how they work with the rest of the town. To see if there's ways that we can find efficiencies. And they may also be opportunities for us to look at program-specific opportunities at the school, as well as across a number of our different programs. We're going to work to get that detail, and what I think we can commit to is that we would be regularly reporting on the use of this reserve, as well as the $1.5 million to Ways and Means, so that how we use that can be clear, evident, and results-focused. But I do fear, if I had to answer the question of what happens if we don't have this funding, we're going to be forced to have to try to find other resources or not have these, and I think that's a really important piece to emphasize. Sometimes it's best to bring in folks from the outside and look at how you're doing business because they have the expertise, they have the bandwidth, and they can bring to bear a surge of workforce that we just couldn't marshal. And when I say workforce, also solutions technologically, where it's not cost effective for the town to bring in on staff, programmers or other things, but this would help us to identify through a third party what those opportunities would be. So we felt like it was appropriate to take this opportunity with this SUP to ask for this consideration, understanding that we need to articulate and demonstrate how we use it, and that will play out in the months to come. But we think it's an important thing based on what we've observed and where we think there are gaps in investments. And we will obviously report back and to shape the budgets in the future based on what we learn. Because I would imagine that some of these findings will require further investments, but it's important that we look at it,
Thank you, Director Esmond. Questions or comments from the committee members? Councilor Moran?
I appreciate the intent. I think it's laudable and forward-thinking. I like that. I think that it's money that, if we invest it appropriately in the right consultants, it could lead to savings. But I think what's kind of being overlooked is the council's own reserve fund hasn't been funded in years, okay? To the extent that we had to borrow to pay for a truck that was damaged for the animal control officer, the first thing I voted on as a new counselor, and I asked, why aren't we taking this from our reserve fund? Well, we don't have one. Mm-hmm. That needs to be restored. It's an embarrassment to the town that the council cannot access in times of unanticipated or emergencies, a small amount of money to address everyday things.
Yep.
That needs to be addressed, and it's not in this budget, and it's perhaps in a future transfer, it could be addressed. I think it's embarrassing for a $160 million budget, or whatever it was last year, that we had to borrow to pay for a pickup truck. It's an embarrassment, and I don't want to repeat that. So we need to address this fund. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Moran. Are there comments or questions from the committee members? Did you have something, Councilor Maglio?
But
And I also think this is a really good idea because I do think that having an opportunity to make some decisions and have a little bit of leeway to continue coming back with best practices. You can't run a town on Google, right? You need to actually have expertise and people and means to consult with them. So I think it's a great idea.
Thank you. And thank you to Councilor Moore, and I understand your point very clearly.
Councilor Flaherty?
So there are like 100,000 ways that I could find to put those $300,000 towards in this budget and every budget I've ever looked at. However, I think it's unwise for a community to not invest in expertise on how to better manage its resources. I hope that this reserve is able to help us recover money that we would have lost otherwise through just not following the very best practice that we could in managing our technology and our budget and all the other things. Furthermore, I have a great deal of confidence in your ability to capitalize on that advice. And that's really important, that you be afforded the opportunity to help us be better. So thank you. I'm going to support it.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Did you have anything? I'm sorry, Councilor Reynolds. Okay. Yeah, I would echo Councilor Flaherty's comments. One question is, do you and the mayor's staff have firms, folks, Collins Center, like, do you have people or consultants in mind that you're planning to utilize this money with? Because it is not nothing.
Yeah.
$300,000 is like more than 3 teachers.
Yeah, understood. I mean, it's a good point. I mean, these are funded with one-time reversions this year. So we focused on that being, that this wouldn't be base building expense, and that this was appropriate. But I hear you. I mean, any decision you make, we have to look at what else we could spend and the policy and the decision of appropriateness. But I think we fear that, that without sort of trying to be able to bring on some resources that help us live in a reality, the new reality, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, I fear that we're going to be continuing these sort of just how do we get to a number measures, and that's what we're trying not to do. But to your first question, the short is this isn't programmed yet, and I think there's been some initial discussions with the schools about wanting to do some focus there, especially. I shouldn't say I think. We've had some initial discussion there because they are looking at a sustained reduction, and that's an opportunity. There were, I think, some work done in the early 2010s. So there's work I think that anyone that comes in would be able to get looking at right away, and that covered, I think, a very wide range of operations and how they worked with the town, finance all the way through. And so I think while we don't have identified contractors in place, I think we can write scopes and get things published pretty quickly. I feel comfortable that. I think there's other opportunities like RevMax projects where I think some of that can be written on contingency basis, so it might not be as much of a cost as just doing the procurement. I did say that I think a business process review is overdue. And that one, I think we need to write a robust scope and try to get our best through a competitive procurement, get our best foot forward on who could come in and help advise us on that. And I think we need to emphasize technology as a guiding theme of this. Because it's not just about budget cuts, too. It's also about the next generation of our workforce, too. And ultimately, it's really about how do we meet the demands of our residents and make sure that digital government isn't just some phrase, but we're actually trying to do, be as provide services where people are operating, which is in the, in the digital space. It's not necessarily in the ways that government's been working, but we are in a heavily regulated, compliant environment, so we have to do that judiciously and make sure that we are accounting for every single resident's needs. So it's not a fast thing, but it's one that we know we have to move towards. And I just can't emphasize how much in my 2 months here, I feel like it hasn't been the theme of how we've come to, and there's very, very understandable reasons for that, but how we've come to these numbers is really about probably, being reactive, and we want to be proactive.
Thank you, Director, and I think that's a incredibly important and worthy goal, and I'm very willing to support this evening and give you and the mayor every opportunity to improve and professionalize and really bring forward town writ large with understanding. I think it would be helpful, and Clerk Semino, if we can get like a quarterly, quarterly report back, not only on what we had requested under Councilor Reynolds' chair of this board multiple times that was really never provided, how we're doing against our budget and actuals. And then if we can fold in an update on how this money is being spent, then that helps us tell the story to residents as well. So we understand how our resources are being used, the limited ones that we have. But thank you for the thoughtfulness with which you've approached this. I am very grateful for that. Okay, I think that's a wrap. Thank you, everyone. We have a number of motions to get through, so Councilor Moran, if you want to begin. I think we have to read them each separately, Clerk Semino. Okay.
Madam Chair, I move that the sum of $624,000 be transferred from the unexpended balance of Fund 0002 to be transferred to the Fund 003 School Operating Fund, and further that the Director of Municipal Finance be authorized to transfer amounts from various Fund 0002 line items in an amount not to exceed $624,000 for this purpose. The sum of $56,640 be transferred from finance lease expenses, that a sum of $38,560 be transferred from finance administration 9C reserve, that $15,000 be transferred from Department of Public Works school utility telephone, that $12,000 be transferred from Department of Public Works school utility gasoline, and that $800 to be transferred from finance IT, munis school utility, or munis annual maintenance, for a total of $123,000 to be transferred to Fund 0003 School Operating Fund.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That is unanimous.
Madam Chair, I move that the sum of $10,000 be transferred from Finance Administration Department, that the sum of $4,000 be transferred to the Finance IT Annual 365 license, and the sum of $1,000 be transferred from Finance IT Munis Annual Maintenance, for a sum of $15,000 to be transferred to Finance Assessing Consultants.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That is unanimous.
Madam Chair, I move that the sum of $5,300 be transferred from Finance Retirement of Debt Principal Bond Principal account, and the sum of $21,300 be transferred from Police Department Communications Sworn Personnel, for a total of $26,600 to be transferred to Finance Interest General Fund Bond Interest.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That is unanimous.
Madam Chair, I move that the sum of $9,000 be transferred from Town Council Administration Consultants, that a sum of $68,060 be transferred from Planning and Development Zoning Board Zoning Administrator, that a sum of $57,140 be transferred from Police Department Detective Bureau Sworn Personnel, for a total of $134,000 from which $50,000 shall be transferred to finance insurance, insurance deductible, and $84,200 shall be transferred to finance insurance and insurance premiums.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That is unanimous.
Madam Chair, I move that the sum of $90,260 be transferred from Fire Department Fire Suppression Uniform Branch, a sum of $8,000 be transferred from Fire Department Licensing Administration Boat Maintenance, and a sum of $74,740 be transferred from DPW School Custodian Department Head, for a sum of $173,000 to be transferred, from which $80,000 shall be transferred to Fire Administration Department Head, $23,000 shall be transferred to Fire Building Maintenance Lighting, and $70,000 shall be transferred to Fire Equipment Maintenance.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That is unanimous.
Madam Chair, I move that the sum of $224,000 be transferred from the Police Department Patrol Bureau sworn personnel, from which $55,000 shall be transferred to Police Administration sworn personnel, $22,000 shall be transferred to Police Building Maintenance Lighting, $95,000 shall be transferred to Police Equipment Maintenance outside motor vehicles, $45,000 shall be transferred to Police Special Services sworn personnel, and $7,000 shall be transferred to Police Animal Control and sworn personnel.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That is unanimous.
Madam Chair, I move that the sum of $46,740 be transferred from the Department of Public Works Highway Labor Custodians Mechanics account, and a sum of $260 be transferred from the Department of Public Works Recreation Department Head, for a sum of $47,000, which shall be transferred to Department of Public Works Snow and Ice Contracted Services.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That is unanimous.
Madam Chair, I move that the sum of $6,000 be transferred from Golf Fund FY 2023 Certified Free Cash to Golf Department Retirement of Principal.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That is unanimous.
Madam Chair, I move that the sum of $50,000 be transferred to licensing inspectors, that $35,000 be transferred from licensing health expenses, public health nurse, that $5,000 be transferred from Department of Public Works construction engineers, that $53,260 be transferred from Department of Public Works highway labor custodians mechanics, that the sum of $25,000 be transferred from the Department of Public Works ground maintenance labor custodians mechanics, that a sum of $41,740 be transferred from Police Department Patrol Bureau sworn personnel, that a sum of $50,000 be transferred from library current topics librarians, that a sum of $40,000 be transferred from Elder Affairs Administration Administrative Clerical, for a total of $300,000 to be transferred to the Mayor's Office Administration Consultants.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Point of information, Counselor Maglio.
Is the $50,000 to be transferred to licensing and licensing inspections, or from?
Thank you. So I would amend my motion to reflect Councilor Maglio's comments.
Thank you, Counselor Maglio. Thank you, Counselor Moran. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That is unanimous.
Golf. Madam Chair, I move that the sum of $229,000 be transferred from Golf Fund FY 2023 Certified Free Cash, from which a sum of $100,000 shall be transferred to the General Fund FY 2023 Certified Free Cash. A sum of $25,000 shall be transferred to Golf Department Administration part-time employees. A sum of $15,000 shall be transferred to Golf Department Equipment Maintenance Mower Repairs. A sum of $76,000 shall be transferred to Golf Department Turf Maintenance Improvements, and a sum of $53,000 shall be transferred to Golf Department Golf Pros Professional Staff.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That is unanimous.
Madam Chair, I move that in accordance with the provisions of Chapter 44, Section 53E, 1/2 of the general laws, the maximum amount that may be spent by the mayor in conjunction with the golf green superintendent from the revolving fund monies without further appropriation during the fiscal year commencing July 1, 2023, to pay for salaries, expenses, and contractual services associated with the operation of the Golf Course Pro Shop be increased to $300,000.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That is unanimous.
Madam Chair, I move that in accordance with the provisions of Chapter 44, Section 53E and 1/2 of the general laws, the maximum amount that may be spent by the mayor in conjunction with the golf green superintendent from the revolving fund monies without further appropriation during the fiscal year commencing July 1, 2023, to pay for salaries, expenses, and contractual services associated with the operation of the golf course food service be increased to $550,000.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That is unanimous. Oh, that's it. Yay. Thank you, Counselor Moran, for reading all those motions. And now, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, B. Cam.